OTB AM.
With Gillette, put your best face forward with our new and improved razors.
7:30 on this Wednesday morning. You're welcome along to OTB AM. Eoin and Shane with you right the way through until 10 o'clock this morning. And we're going to be bringing you the very latest as European football turns into one giant sporting equivalent of Fire Festival between now and then. We're going to be getting the Spanish angle, the Irish angle, the women's football angle and the Manchester United angle this morning. Shane Hannon, are you ready for this?
Good morning, Owen. I don't know if I'm ready for this because it keeps changing every 5 minutes. So I feel like I'm going to look at my phone in 5 minutes and something else mental is going to have happened. I went for a run yesterday evening and leaving for the run, everything was as normal. It was a shit show, but it was normal. And then I came back and, you know, Chelsea fans were protesting. Petr Cech was intervening. Woodward was gone. Clubs were bowing out left, right and centre. So who knows what's going to happen this morning.
It was actually remarkable listening to the news round last night when Joe, Richie and Adrian were chatting through it, and in real time this massive story was just crumbling all around them. That full football show, by the way, as well, as we're checking out on podcast this morning, because it was brilliant stuff from a whole range of different voices. As you say, it has moved on quite a bit since then. Again, Shane, one of those things is the situation at Manchester United, where this is just another one of these stories where in any other week it will be the biggest sports story of the month. The fact that Ed Woodward has actually resigned from his role, or is set to resign from his role. It may not be as big as, say, 6 English clubs all pulling out together for this new European Super League, but it's a bloody big deal.
Yeah, and like Manchester United fans will be massively celebrating this news that Ed Woodward is departing the club. Like, the statement was suggesting that they've brought this announcement just early forward because he was going to leave at the end of the year anyway. But you know, this is a PR win for United. This is what they're trying to do to bring the fans back on side. And look, Ed Woodward is in a job, £3 million a year, a specialist in failure, as the banner said during the Burnley game. Someone who is deeply unpopular with fans and kind of has that intangible link with the Glazers and always will. So for that statement to have no mention even of the Super League, for Ed Woodward not to have shown his face in front of a camera while he expected Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and Harry Maguire and others to stand in front of a camera the other day, at a time when they knew very little of what was going on, and probably knew as much as we did, and certainly as the Sky Sports reporters did. This is a long time coming for United. And look, Graham Souness said it quite well last night, I thought, as well. He spoke about the fact that this was a 177-page contract between these guys. And you know, they've said that it's only been in the pipeline really a month, but a 177-page contract, as Souness pointed out, is not formed in a month. These guys are like rats from a sinking ship, Owen. I mean, Seferin's comments from Uefa probably summarised it best, talking about the conversations he had with some of these guys, with Woodward and with others, with Andrea Agnelli as well. How can you trust a word that comes out of any of their mouths now? That's probably why Ed Woodward has decided to depart at this particular juncture, because you can't trust a word that comes out of his mouth. And look, this 177-page contract, it's like in one conversation you have a girlfriend telling you she loves you, and then in one fell swoop she's off making life plans with someone else. 177 pages worth of life plans. So this is... It just astounds me, the greed. And look, a lot of pundits have been very strong on this over a number of days, but the greed at this particular moment, when clubs are having to furlough staff last year and during a pandemic, is just extraordinary.
This thing is still alive, by the way. It's still waddling along in a zombified version of itself. Its arms have been chopped off, its legs have been chopped off, its head has been chopped off, but its torso is still waddling along towards us, this European Super League. So it has vowed to reshape the project. That's the latest we've got from the European Super League overnight. They said in a statement, despite the announced departure of the English clubs forced to take such decisions due to the pressure on them, we are convinced our proposal is fully aligned with the European law and regulations. We shall reconsider the most appropriate steps to reshape the project, always having in mind our goals of offering fans the best experience possible while enhancing solidarity payments for the entire football community. So it hasn't gone away, you know, the European Super League. The Italian clubs both Milan clubs, I should say, are considering jumping ship. They look likely to be the first two rats to swim off the ship this morning. The third remaining rat, Juventus, is a larger, more boisterous rat and maybe has less of a sense of what everybody else thinks about its own rodent abilities. Juventus won't be jumping ship for a while. Neither will Real Madrid. You would presume that they will be the last two to swim away from this thing, Perez and Agnelli. That leaves Barcelona and Atletico Madrid after the two. Milan clubs jump later on this morning as the remainder of the 4 teams left in the European Super League, but that 4 will probably become 2 eventually when it comes to confirmed teams left in this thing. When it comes to those that have actually left, there's been a lot of grovelling. Arsenal released a statement last night, and I'm actually quite surprised with how clear they were in their apology. They said, as a result of listening to you and the wider football community over recent days, we are withdrawing from the proposed Super League. We made a mistake and we apologise for it. The decision to be part of the Super League was driven by our desire to protect Arsenal, the club you love, and to support the game you love through greater solidarity and financial stability. They said a system needs to be fixed. We need to work together to find solutions which protect the future of the game and harness the extraordinary power football has to get us on the edge of our seats. Our aim is always to make the right decisions for this great football club, to protect it for the future and take us forward. We didn't make the right decision here, which we fully accept. Now, getting a club to have just apologised to sign up to any remodeled Super League is going to be a difficult task. That will give a lot of people hope this morning that clubs are actually coming out to apologise, because you can't apologise and then say, yeah, you know what, this has been modified, we're up for this thing once again. Daniel Levy apologised as well. He said, we regret the anxiety and upset caused by the ESL proposal. You mentioned Alexander Seferin, Shane. He has had a field day. He is smug as hell over the last 12 hours. When Manchester City were the second club to leave the ESL last night, he said, I'm delighted to welcome City back to the European football family. It takes courage to admit a mistake, but I never doubted they had the ability and common sense to make that decision. City are a real asset to the game. So Seferin is loving all this. This is the same man who called all these people snakes and liars, but maybe now that Woodward is gone, and maybe if you sort out Agnelli and he never shows his face in public again, Seferin can forget about all of this. In another statement, he said, it is admirable to admit a mistake, and these big clubs made a big mistake, but they are back in the fold now, and I know they have a lot to offer, not just to our competitions, but to the whole of the European game. The important thing now is that we move on, we build the unity that the game enjoyed before this, and move forward together. If one man has won from this, Shane, it is Alexander Seferin.
He's come out of this smelling like roses. Uefa have come out of this smelling like roses, and the vitriol, the smugness, as you said last night, coming out of him. But why wouldn't he be smug? This is the gall of these guys to do this at this particular juncture in time. If this was a normal year, if there wasn't a pandemic, if there weren't people struggling with the world over, if there weren't, football clubs last year, as I said, having to furlough people, this would still be a disaster, a PR disaster, and a disgrace, to put it mildly. And even you mentioned a couple of the statements there, like Liverpool's one last night when it came through. And they said, quote, we've heard from the stakeholders. And as Graham Souness pointed out, what about the stakeholders that matter, the fans? They had absolutely no say in this. They just had to deal with the consequences. Players as well, the innocent bystanders. But to say that, we listen to the stakeholders, they weren't talking about the fans there. And like you used the word sheepishly is mentioned or this morning on the back page of some of the papers. The way in which Arsenal, Spurs, United and Liverpool departed last night was sheepish, personified. It was just such a cowardly way for them to exit. And you look at clubs like Chelsea and Man City, who at least had the brains to leave a couple of hours earlier. And you might say, well, at least the other clubs followed. But Abramovich had the brains to get out of this thing before it became an absolute PR disaster. At least Chelsea and City can recover from this in some way. But how do United and Liverpool recover from this in particular? Spurs are obviously following along, and so are Arsenal. They're mid-table teams in the Premier League at the moment. They're just doing what they're told in some ways. But for Liverpool and United, and this has been discussed over the last 24 hours, last 12 hours, like how do Henry and Werner and the Glazers show their face at their respective stadiums again? I mean, Joel Glazer hasn't been at a Manchester United match in a couple of years. I think a Barcelona game in the Champions League a few years ago was his last time at Old Trafford. So he doesn't care about United anyway. He doesn't care about the fans. He doesn't care about the history of the club. And neither do Werner or Henry at Liverpool. They don't care about Bill Shankly's legacy, and his grandson coming out yesterday saying his grandfather will be spinning in his grave at all of this. They just don't care. How can they show their faces ever again at these clubs? I would suspect they won't, Owen, to be fair.
Yeah, it's true, and we're going to be getting Daniel Harris's take on that a little bit later on as well. Maybe Ed Woodward is just the sacrificial lamb for all of this, Shane, and maybe that will be that as far as the Glazers are concerned. They are extremely stubborn men. They have the brassest neck you're ever likely to see. So if anybody's going to dig in and hold on to power over the next little while, when all the pressure will be against them, it will be the Glazer family. Right, it is 20 to 8 on this Wednesday morning, OTB AM, live in association with Gillette. Good morning, start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. Will O'Callaghan, what's the crack?
Yeah, good morning, Owen. Good morning, Shane. Only really one place to start in terms of the headlines this morning. All 6 of the English clubs deciding after joining the European Super League on Sunday are now abandoning the breakaway competition less than 3 days since then, putting the entire scheme now in jeopardy. Hundreds of supporters protested against Chelsea's involvement outside Stamford Bridge last night ahead of their goalless draw against Brighton. Those behind the Super League, with just the Italian and Spanish clubs left now at this point, say they're now considering how to reshape the project. Meanwhile, as you were just mentioning a moment ago, Manchester United confirming that Ed Woodward will leave his role as executive vice chairman at the end of the year. Woodward put out a statement last night saying he was extremely proud of his achievements at the club over the last 16 years. The last decade or so, he's been in that role of executive vice chairman. Chelsea are up to 4th place in the Premier League this morning following their goalless draw at home to Brighton. Manchester City can re-establish an 11-point lead at the top of the table tonight if they can get victory against Aston Villa. Before that, Ryan Mason will have his first game in charge of Tottenham. They entertain Southampton in the first game of the post-Mourinho era. An injury time header from Danny Mandrew kept Shamrock Rovers top of the SSE Airtricity League Premier Division last night. The defending champions were 1-0 winners away to Drogheda, but Sligo Rovers have an identical record now at the hoops. Late goals from Mark Byrne and David Cawley gave them a 3-1 victory against Bohemians. St. Pat's continue their unbeaten start with a 1-0 victory at home to Waterford. Derry City and Dundalk, both struggling this season, drew 1 apiece at the Brandywell, while Longford and Finn Harps played out a goalless draw. In the Championship, Norwich are being made to wait to be crowned champions. The leaders, who are already going back to the top flight for next season, lost 1-0 to second place Watford last night. Brentford are a full 10 points off the automatic promotion places, so you'd imagine Watford will be going up with Norwich after their 1-1 draw against Cardiff. At the other end of the table, strugglers Derby lost 3-0 at Preston. Sheffield Wednesday's 1-0 victory over Blackburn means they're now within 4 points of safety. And elsewhere, Swansea lost 1-0 at home to QPR. In Scotland, Rangers will aim to take another step towards an unbeaten Scottish Premiership season tonight ahead of their cup meeting on Sunday. The champions are at St Johnstone. Celtic can still have a say in the battle for third. They're at Aberdeen tonight, while Hibs will host Livingston. Elsewhere, the bottom side Hamilton face Motherwell, while fellow strugglers Kilmarnock welcome Dundee United. Owen, we were talking about the draws for the championships yesterday. We had the last of the draws last night, and it is pretty top heavy on one side in Ulster. Cavan and Tyrone will meet in the quarterfinals of the Ulster Football Championship. Cavan trying to defend the Anglo-Celt, while Tyrone have got their new management team this season. Derry will await the winners of the preliminary round clash between Down and Donegal in the last 8. So that'll form one quarter-final on that side. And the other side of the draw, you've got Armagh against Antrim in a quarter-final, while Fermanagh will play Monaghan. So one side particularly is going to be pretty hectic there. Shane Hannon, how are Monaghan going to battle this year's Ulster Championship then? Give us your route.
That you've gone straight from a jugular there, Owen. But yeah, like the main headlines have been kind of dwarfed. I know you wanted to speak about Peter Crowley, no doubt, Kerry Legend retiring yesterday, and the Ulster Championship draw has been sadly dwarfed in importance by this European Super League. It's a good draw for Monaghan. I say that very tentatively because Owen Donnelly scored a late goal in a skilling to knock Monaghan out a couple of years ago in a bit of a surprise in Ulster. But home to Fermanagh, then if they win, they play, I think it's the winner of Armagh Antrim in a semi-final. But as you said, Will, top heavy. You know, you have Cavan, Tyrone and Donegal all on one side of that draw, which makes it very, very interesting given it's a knockout tournament. But as we saw last year, Monaghan 9 points up at one stage against Cavan. Cavan came back to win that game and go on to win the Ulster Championship. So it's hard to know how to predict Ulster football anymore, but hopefully Monaghan can put up a bit of a fight. It'd be lovely to win an Ulster Championship in a knockout year. It just adds to the excitement, I think.
Yeah, like between the Super League and the Championship draws, there are two extremely protracted stories going on this week. That is the lot though, Will, isn't it? That is all of our Championship draws at this point.
Yeah, they're all completed now at this stage. So we have a roadmap now, given that the league fixtures came out a few days ago too, that we can now at least start planning watching on TV in terms of the Gaelic games that we're going to see. I'm not sure if we'll have fans back at any point during the season. I mean, a lot could be determined by Leinster's trial project, where they're going to try and get some supporters back into the stadium during the end of this season and into the summer. The GA are kind of waiting to see what happens there, potentially around antigen testing and so on as well. But you kind of get the feeling it's probably going to be empty stadiums again. But yeah, that completes the championship draw. We had Leinster football and hurling yesterday, and we had the Munster draws and the Connacht football on Monday night. So at least at this stage, we can start making some plans.
Good stuff. Is that the lot when it comes to sports headlines, Will?
There's a few bits. I'm sure Shane was watching the snooker across the last 24 hours as well. Mark Allen will be keeping an eye himself on the action in Sheffield today. He eased into the last 16 at the World Championship with a 10-2 victory against Lu Hai Chan last night. Allen will play either Kurt Mafflin or Mark Selby in round 2. They get their first round match underway today. Prior to that, you've got the 3-time champion Mark Williams, who opens his campaign against Sam Craigie, while Sean Murphy will be up against Mark Davis. We've got some qualifiers for the Olympics too. Mona McSharry and Daniel Whiffen both booked their places at the games yesterday. McSharry set a new Irish record to qualify in the 100-metre breaststroke. Very impressive from Whiffen. He shaved a full 13 seconds off the national 800 metres freestyle record, while also qualifying for Tokyo. Shane Ryan and Dara Green also posted qualifying times at the Irish Olympic trials. We know that Eddie Jones is going to be staying on as the head coach of England for next season. The English RFU completed their review last evening about their disappointing 5th place finish in the Six Nations. The excuses which were used, the pandemic and also the fact that some of their players were underprepared or fatigued. I think particularly looking at the Saracens players, it's after feedback came in from players, coaches and the support staff. And finally, Seamus Power has been forced to withdraw from this week's Zurich Classic of New Orleans. The Waterford golfer has contracted COVID-19. He'll now go through a period of self-isolation, and they say he will receive the full support of the PGA Tour.
Good stuff, Will. Thanks a million for that. Loads of reaction coming in this morning as well. You can tweet us at Off The Ball or leave a comment on the YouTube stream if that's where you get us. We're going to get to Danielle Harris in just a moment, but first let's tell you what's coming up through the rest of the show. So it's going to be quite European Super League centric this morning, but there are a few other bits and pieces. So Daniel is standing by. We're going to get to him on Manchester United and what happens next there in just a moment. Graham Hunter then will give us the view from Spain. We heard yesterday from Andy Mitten that the Spanish fans are maybe on board for this. What happens next from their standpoint and from the standpoint of Florentino Perez is going to be very interesting. Suzy Wrack of The Guardian will be with us later on to answer the question about whether or not this is a massive bullet dodged for the women's game. It certainly seems like it. It certainly seemed tokenistic the way it was mentioned in the proposal from the Super League, so we'll get her take on that later on. Shane Murphy then is where we're going to spill away from the Super League a little bit later on at 8:45. He'll talk to us about some of the injuries that GAA players are going to be susceptible to as this season starts up and running. I know that everybody's training this week and naturally there's going to be quite a heavy training load immediately. League of Ireland reaction with Daniel Lambert and Stuart Byrne coming up after 9 o'clock. Really looking forward to that piece. League of Ireland and those involved with it probably have a lot of thoughts after the last couple of days. And then football show reaction from 9:30 this morning. It was a crazy football show last night, so we'll bring you the best bits from that at 9:30. At 7:48 on this Wednesday morning, delighted to welcome Danielle Harris to the show. Good morning, Daniel.
Hiya.
The end of an era. Ed Woodward, fare thee well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it is an era of sorts. I mean, his own missive when he quit was, I mean, it really said a lot. When he said he praised himself presiding over an era in which United had won the Europa League, the FA Cup and the League Cup. And as though, number one, this was his achievement, and also as though these were achievements of which one should be proud. I mean, it's quite remarkable, really, the lack of self-knowledge. And I think the thing that it really rings so beautifully fittingly was that we saw some of the plans for this Super League, and we know how phenomenally ill-conceived they were. But imagine how ill-conceived they actually were. The stuff we haven't seen. It's just phenomenal that 2 days, 3 days it should take for the whole thing to be totally knocked over. And that really is the defining feature of Woodward's period at United. Just absolute total incompetence. And not just that, but absolutely mind-boggling arrogance. Not only did he decide to steal football, but he thought he could half-ass it. You think you can take the world game, sweep it into your pocket without even trying, and no one will mind. And yeah, that is Ed Woodward.
There's loads to get into on the Super League angle, but just on the Manchester United angle, why is this happening now? Is it simply the Glazers saying, well, we got to find a scapegoat and we got to find it immediately?
I mean, I don't know if it's exactly a scapegoat. It's just, how could his position be tenable? He lied to all the authorities above him, all the footballing authorities. He threw Ole Gunnar Solskjaer under the bus, and then he got a public bollocking of Hazard Maguire and Luke Shaw. Imagine having to go home to your family after Harry Maguire and Luke Shaw have taken you to the cleaners in front of the squad. You can't. I mean, it's quite hard to come back from that, I dare say. Quite hard to come back from that just as a bloke, never mind as someone in a position of authority in these places where you've been absolutely decimated. So I think that there probably is an element of scapegoating to it, but there's also a very significant element of, why would anyone care what you say or do what you say or want to talk to you ever again? And that is where we are.
Do you have any more detail on the specifics of the conversation that took place between Maguire and Shaw and Ed Woodward?
I don't, and apparently Bruno Fernandes was also involved, but it is just funnier if it's the other two. And I'm not dissing the other two, but it's like you're reminded of, was it what Margaret Thatcher said to Geoffrey Howe, that it was getting a bollocking off him in Parliament was like being savaged by a dead sheep. And I mean, Harry Maguire and Luke Shaw, both of them done absolutely great jobs in standing up for themselves, standing up for the supporters, but they're not Roy Keane, are they? I mean, it's not like taking a going over off Roy Keane or even off Norman Whiteside, off Mark Hughes, like people who are kind of like, you got the articulacy of Roy Keane, they're physically intimidating. I mean, Harry Maguire is sort of rhetorically famous for turning up and giving these hangdog interviews of how sorry he is now every time United get beaten. So there's something about being taken apart by those people. So no, I mean, I don't know exactly how the conversation went, but there are various tales about, Harry Maguire apparently speaking quite strongly. And I mean, I think that you can't take something forward without having buy-in from anyone. And this plan was basically, it was 6 people, 6 groups, families, whatever you want to call them, deciding that, in fact, football belonged to them. And the arrogance that it must take to not consult with anyone, to not think that, well, you should probably have a TV deal in place before you start talking about TV money. If you're going to take football away from everyone, you might want to talk to government and see what they're saying. Literally nothing. Just nothing apart from that little speech, that little letter at the beginning, and Perez going on TV and making an ass of himself. Nothing. And I think that on that first day, I mean, that first day was extremely depressing. I mean, I was on the Guardian blog, like that daily blog, just as the dreadful news was coming in, like one after the other. The only thing I can compare it to is like when the Conservatives win the general election and you just sort of see the seats dropping, and it's just, you're thinking, what on earth is wrong with people? And then I think that the turning point felt like, for me anyway, it felt like Monday Night Football. And it's hard to know if we're investing Neville and Carragher with more power than they have. But the way that they performed just made you think this is not over. This is not over by a long chalk. And then on the second day, like Boris Johnson starts talking about legislative bombs. And at that point, you think, actually, this isn't going to happen. And it felt all along like the ways to stop it would be either the government or the players. If all the players say we're not playing in this league, then it's finished. And if the government start legislating, then also it's finished. And it's kind of like the opposite. Like yesterday just felt like watching the Conservative Party lose the general election. Felt like 1997 when they're just losing seat after seat after seat after seat, and they're dropping and dropping and dropping, and then at the end of the night, Michael Portillo goes. And it's just this intense celebration of what feels like years and years of oppressive law just absolutely destroyed in one sensational, glorious evening of revenge and schadenfreude and the joy and beauty of existing. And I think the lesson for us is that it doesn't end here. And the funny thing about this all is that it feels now that this overreach is going to cost them more than whatever money they spend and whatever political capital they've expended, because now there's going to be a proper look at football, and that is going to end up with them having more things taken away than they had to begin with. And I think what we learn is, I mean, it feels absurd to say that we've learned something, because it's always been obvious that when we band together, we have a lot of power. And that is a bizarre thing to say when you consider what goes on with our government. But normal people, when they act collectively, have a lot of power. And it's taken 2 days and these people have capitulated. And that is something to bear in mind. I mean, it's something to bear in mind politically, but it's something to bear in mind when it comes specifically to football as well, because what we can now do is we can say, well, actually, that isn't enough. And what we require is start making lists of things that we require. We require a 50+1 ownership model. We require clubs being protected as community assets. We require legislation that stops anyone taking our clubs away from their locale, because that was also on the table. But I think the end point for this league wasn't just the league. It was taking the league around the world. It was maybe basing clubs outside of their countries just to, whether for tax reasons or to attract money and investment in those countries. And these are the kind of things that we need to think about now, because this isn't just an opportunity to defeat the Super League. This is an opportunity to row back 20, 30 years of the piece-by-piece destruction of what football is. And we're in a position now to do it, and we need to hang on, and we need to keep fighting, because they're going to hope that we forget, and we've got to make sure that we don't forget.
Daniel, you mentioned the word arrogance there a minute or two ago, and it's just so weaselly the way this whole thing came about. And I think back to photographs on a pre-season tour a few years ago of Woodward chatting with Florentino Perez, and you wonder, how long have these guys been in cahoots about this whole thing? How long have they been planning this mutiny? But when you mention the word arrogance, we talk about public relations in the last couple of days, and we wonder, do the Glazers care? Does Ed Woodward care about how this looks now that it's reached its head and collapsed? I mean, do you think people as arrogant as that seem to care or will care about the downfall and the fallout from all of this?
I'm absolutely sure Ed Woodward will care about this humiliation, because this is going to stay with him until the day that he dies. He's that guy. The Glazers, I think, less so. I mean, again, no one likes being humiliated in public, and make no mistake, that is what this is. The Glazers are quite impervious, but it's partly because they just stay away. They don't live in this country like Ed Woodward does. They live in Tampa, so they can go about their business in America like this has never happened. So I don't think that is quite the same for them. I think what they do is they imperviously wait things out. It's what happened with the takeover. When the day that they took over, they left Old Trafford a police van that was being attacked by United supporters. Like, they won't have enjoyed that. They didn't enjoy that, and it felt at the time that if that carried on, then that might be enough to stop them doing it. But then once it stopped, they were able to wait it out, and obviously they had the genius of Alex Ferguson allowing them to win trophies. So things kind of quietened down a bit, and they were just able to ignore it. I think that, I mean, they will be able to ignore this because they don't live in this country, as I said, but for them, the penalties are going to be financial. And what can the government do, basically? Because there is now going to be a proper football task force. There's going to be some kind of regulator. There's going to be all these kinds of things, and all of that stuff is going to cost the Glazers money. I think one of the things we need to warn about here is that, much as I would celebrate the day that the Glazers leave Manchester United, the problem with United in particular, more so than the other clubs, is that the only people that can afford to buy United probably are people that should not own United, because the amount of money that United is worth and the amount of money that the Glazers would demand, if you have that kind of money, then you are almost definitely a bad lot. And I don't know what we do about that, because it always felt with United that you were kind of always hoping that somehow some benevolent, unfeasibly rich, righteous United supporter would buy it from the Glazers. But then the floating on the New York Stock Exchange was the thing that made you think this is now never going to be possible. And I don't know, obviously, how far the government is prepared to go, but I think that there will probably be an understanding that the 50+1 model that they have in Germany is the way of safeguarding all our football clubs. But how you do that with United in particular, when there are shares listed on the New York Stock Exchange, I've no idea. Are the government going to be committed enough to start requisitioning people's shares, to start saying to all the people involved in this, you're not fit guardians for our football clubs, so we're kicking you out? That's obviously a lot of trouble. I mean, they have kicked Roman Abramovich out of this country, but physically not allowing him to live in this country. But are they going to be able to start requisitioning shares or issuing new shares? Are they going to kick out Abu Dhabi that they've sold off half of Manchester to? And these are the kind of questions that we need to be asking now. I mean, on the one hand, it's dreadful that we're in this position where we're actually having to ask these questions. On the other hand, these questions are being asked, and that is a massive improvement and a complete consequence of that arrogance of the overreach.
Certainly, Ed Woodward's departure will be seen as one of the positives to come out of this for Manchester United fans. Another of the positives that kind of struck me in the last day or two was this tribalism. This, I guess, the rivalry between Liverpool and Manchester United fans is something, you'll know as someone who has written extensively about United. I'm sure you faced backlash, criticism and abuse even from Liverpool fans and from rival fans generally on social media over the years. But do you think this has changed those rivalries forever, that these clubs have now come together in a way in which will never be forgotten?
I think maybe. I mean, I don't think it's changed the rivalry. I mean, the rivalry will always be the rivalry, and that's what we love. So I'd never say that would. I don't think that's going to happen. But I mean, it was obvious for years. I mean, I think the first time you really realised it was when the Glazers took over, because you were going around the country supporting United, and you were seeing USA flags, and people were shouting for the Glazers, and hey, United, love Glazer, all that kind of thing, from City, from Liverpool, but not just there, from everywhere, from Arsenal at that cup. That United, just after the takeover, United played Arsenal at the cup final, and there were American flags in the Arsenal end of that cup final. And at the time, I mean, maybe I was quite naive. I thought that was quite surprising, because I was at the time thinking, this stuff's not really that funny. I don't think I would celebrate that kind of thing happening to one of those clubs, because we want those clubs to continue existing. And when the Glazers took over United's existence was in peril, because the amount of money that they were borrowing didn't seem feasible to pay back. Like the world, it worked out for them in the end because Fergie was so good. But had the financial crash come a little bit earlier, then who knows how that would have gone. And so it was quite surprising to see that whole USA thing, because, it could have happened to anyone. And indeed it did. It happened to Liverpool with Hicks and Gillette. It's happened to Arsenal with Stan Kroenke. And that was always the fear that it would happening to any of these clubs, because ultimately there are things that are more significant than your footballing antipathies with regard to football and just with regard to existing. I mean, when I'm sure that the majority of the United support and the majority of the Liverpool support vote for the same political party, because their interests are aligned. Like, their interests in the wider world are aligned in wanting fairer redistribution of wealth, wanting social justice, and wanting the world to be a better, fairer place, wanting to get rid of structural inequality, wanting to get rid of structural racism. All these things are more important than football. And even in a very purely footballing aspect, it's always been the case. And I remember writing about it when the Glazers were taking over United, and subsequently that the way to defeat the TV companies was to put aside the hatred just in this aspect, and not to forget about it, not to pretend it doesn't exist, not when you go to Anfield to feel any differently about it, but you could see it happening in Germany. In Germany, they started switching kickoff times. The fans got together. They all said, no, that isn't going to happen. And it got stopped. And that is the only way that it works. The same way a union works, basically. As a worker on your own, you have no power. As a group of workers, you have a lot of power, and you need to tap into that power. And one of the very things that so attracts TV companies, disaster capitalists, venture capitalists to English football is that rivalry and that hatred. And that rivalry and that hatred is the thing that sustains their flow of money, because it convinces TV audiences that around the world that there's something going on here. There's real, they love when I was doing the Guardian blog, I was getting emails from people all around the world, from China, from Eritrea, from South Africa, from America, of people saying, this product seems to have been created for me, and I don't want this product. What I like about English football is the localism, the local history, the working people, the rivalry, all those things. And these are the things that make English football special, unique, incredible. And what needs to happen is we need to maintain all those things, but just on these issues that affect us all, we need to stop laughing at each other's misfortune, not laughing at each other's misfortune with the failure that comes as a consequence of it. Like, I don't expect Liverpool Man City fans to not be laughing at what's happened to United post-Fergie as a consequence of the Glazers. But when it comes to the things that affect us all, we need to all get together, because that's what that works. And I don't think anyone's going to forget that, as I said. And I feel like this overreach would have changed the entire footballing environment and atmosphere in our country. And in future, this is going to happen more, and these people need to look out.
Yeah, absolutely. On the point of Liverpool, we have a bit of footage this morning. It's coming from BBC Sport. They've doorstepped Liverpool owner John Henry entering Fenway Stadium in Boston in the past few hours. We can have a look at this now. So we've got footage of him entering a building. He's not going to really say anything here as he gets doorstepped by the reporter.
Good evening, Mr. Henry. We're from the BBC. Any word for the fans? Any word for the fans, please? Is this the end of your plans for the ESL? Do you still intend to keep hold of your ownership in Liverpool? Mr. Henry, we couldn't hear you earlier. Is there anything you would like to say to the fans of Liverpool?
Yep.
Is there anything you would like to say? We can't hear you.
You could see there, for people listening on the radio, he said nothing, as you could probably make out there. He has just released a statement that we'll bring you in the next little while, John Henry. But this is going to be really interesting. It's decision-making time for a lot of these owners. If we go back to a situation, Daniel, where football really isn't making any money for them, there may be a realistic situation where the Americanization, when it comes to ownership of English clubs, is just going to diminish over the next little while.
I mean, they are still making a lot of money, and that's the thing. Like, they weren't happy making phenomenal amounts of money. It wasn't enough, and they had to have more. And I mean, it's just I can't get enough of watching these kind of pictures. I think because the thing with the Glazers for sure is that what they basically did was they realised that United was undervalued, which it was, and so they bought it with other people's money, not a penny of their own money, and loaded all the debt onto the books of the club, knowing that I think the thing that they had spotted that was that in American football was the sponsorship, that everything is sponsored. So what Arsenal did that absolutely screwed them for years was when they built the Emirates, they sold all the naming right, all the sponsorship to Emirates. Like 5 minutes later, United are busy sponsoring, they're getting the manager's seat sponsored, DHL are sponsoring the training kit. They've got deals with Mr. Potato Head and Turkish Airlines and this and that. They just sponsor absolutely everything. And Arsenal couldn't do it because they'd sold everything to Emirates, whereas United sponsored everything. And that was just the Glazers bringing that American sports model to England. And ultimately, I mean, kind of laugh at it because it is demeaning that United have all these official partners and Mr. Potato Head this, but ultimately it made the club a lot of money. I mean, it wasn't good for United, it was good for the Glazers. And that's one of the things that as a supporter you might put up with if that money was invested in the team, even though it's kind of cheap, it's so cheap and nasty. At some level, obviously you want the players, and there are compromises that you might make in order to get that. You want cheap tickets, you want good players. But I think the other thing the Glazers were certain they were going to be able to do, and probably all of these clubs owners thought they would do at some point, was the collective TV right deal would go. And then at that point, when you're selling your own TV rights yourselves, then that is a phenomenal amount of money. And when that became impossible to do, I guess they moved over to something like the Super League. And I think probably what hastened it also was the desperation of the Spanish clubs, who don't have enough money even to keep the players that they have, never mind to refresh their squads and compete. And I think probably they were the only ones who were probably pushing as hard as United were, was Real Madrid, because Real Madrid have got massive problems. And the funny thing about it all is that Madrid, like, they're blaming Corona, but the reason why they're in this position is just staggering mismanagement, because they should be making obscene amounts of money. United are making obscene amounts of money, and they're not selling their own TV rights. Madrid are selling their own TV rights, and the reason they're in this position, obviously Corona is a problem for everyone, and they've lost a load of money, but you should be saving for a rainy day when you're making that amount of money. They have no need to spend all the money that they have spent, because they should be understanding that bad stuff can happen. So with the John Henry thing, I mean,
Daniel, sorry to cut across you, but speaking of John Henry, he has just released a video statement via Liverpool Football Club. So let's have a listen to that.
I want to apologise to all the fan supporters of Liverpool Football Club for the disruption I caused over the past 48 hours. It goes without saying, but it should be said, that the project put forward was never going to stand without the support of the fans. No one ever thought differently in England. Over these 48 hours, you were very clear that it would not stand. We heard you. I heard you. And I want to apologize to Jurgen, to Billy, to the players, and to everyone who worked so hard at LFC to make our fans proud. They have absolutely no responsibility for this disruption. They were the most disrupted, and unfairly so. This is what hurts most. They love your club and work to make you proud every single day. I know the entire LFC team has the expertise, leadership, and passion necessary to rebuild trust and help us move forward. More than a decade ago, when we signed up for the challenges associated with football, we dreamed of what you dreamed of, and we've worked hard to improve your club. Our work isn't done, and I hope you'll understand that even when we make mistakes, we're trying to work in your club's best interests. In this endeavor, I've let you down. Again, I'm sorry, and I alone am responsible for the unnecessary negativity brought forward over the past couple of days. It's something I won't forget and shows the power that fans have today and will rightly continue to have. If there's one thing this horrible pandemic has clearly shown, it's how crucial fans are to our sport and to every sport. It's shown in every empty stadium. It's been an incredibly tough year for all of us, virtually no one unaffected. It's important that the Liverpool football family remain intact, vital, and committed to what we've seen from you globally with local gestures of kindness and support. I can promise you I will do whatever I can to further that. Thanks for listening.
Daniel, the thing with these apologies, and they seem relatively sincere, is that you can't now go to a revised Super League after apologising like that, or am I being totally naive?
I mean, that was delicious. I'll say that again. I enjoyed that. I mean, I think the thing is yeah, like there did sound like that you could taste the shame there, and I think that we need to be very clear that there are different kinds of shame. The shame of what you did, and the shame at being made to look a total arse in front of the entire planet. And it's hard to differentiate between the two. So, I mean, I know he's trying to be dead statesman, like using the language that George Bush used when Saddam invaded Kuwait about this will not stand, this aggression will not stand. But I'm sure that he is extremely ashamed of himself. But I think the thing that you take from that is he's not intending to go anywhere. He's intending to stay because he's got his ATM, that is Liverpool, and he intends to keep that. So I think that is the main thing, that he's not going anywhere and he's trying to apologise and build bridges. Whether he actually feels shame at what he did, only he knows. I don't know. I mean, seems fairly unlikely. But no, I agree that I think what will happen, I think that Super League probably is off the agenda forever because, or at least, the government will legislate to stop this from ever happening again. I think that's going to happen. But obviously, Parliament can make law and Parliament can unmake law. So you may, in the future, get someone even less scrupulous than Boris Johnson. I mean, that sounds unlikely, but you never know. You may get someone even less scrupulous than Boris Johnson who will unmake whatever law gets made, and there will indeed be a Super League. But no, I think we're probably safe from that Super League for now. And I actually think that we're going to be in a better position at the end of all of this than we were when we started.
It is 14 minutes past 8. Want to welcome Graham Hunter to the show. Morning, Graham.
Morning.
The thing is, there is still a zombified version of the Super League roaming around between Spain and Italy this morning. What is the latest when it comes to the Spanish clubs?
Well, that's a very good question. Let me answer pictorially, shall I? I hope you can see this. Tell me if you can.
Yeah.
Is that good enough? So people at home are able to see the front cover of Marca. And it says Super Ridicule. It pictures the fans outside Stamford Bridge, and it goes on to say that the pressure of English fans, they talk about, rather than other clubs or the media or ex-players, smashes the sort of egotistical Super League. Now, that's Marca. They're not the power brokers, they're not Florentino. But of all the printed output on football in Spain, they're the ones who march to Florentino's beat. Normally, they won't put the boot into him for almost any reason, but they signal him, they point at him. When your closest PR ally turns against you, and when they print a double cover, this is also Marca, and they show that tonight and tomorrow we've got a full league programme, and they call what's happening in La Liga the Super League for everybody. That is having a boot at an ex-ally when they're down, and then coming back and stamping on the face again. You saw the communique in the early hours of this morning that came out from the Super League saying, well, justice and right is still on our side, and we were doing this for you, and we'll continue to find. You know, first of all, I want to pay tribute to everybody involved in the Super League for evoking for any of us who grew up watching Three Stooges and Marx Brothers movies. And I also want to thank them for evoking all of us who ever played amateur football. When you turn up and the striker's drunk and the goalkeeper hasn't got his kit and somebody forgot to boot the referee. Because judging on this utter pig's breakfast, and I'm unsure if I've ever in my working career seen anything as badly organised, as humiliating by so-called grown-ups than this. And you wonder, had they gone ahead, would they have remembered to put referees? Would they have turned up and said, we forgot to tell Juventus or Milan where the pitch is this week? Somebody give them a phone. They're close enough. They'll be here in a minute. It's been completely laughable. I don't want to evoke the way in which these rat clubs split amongst each other. And I do think that Sheffield, in the head of the Uefa, has played a canny hand by taking briefings from Bayern and Paris Saint-Germain, ex-cohorts of the rebels, and having his card well and truly marked by two clubs who've gone up in power now, Paris Saint-Germain and Bayern Munich, and who still want more power, more money, more change. I do think that, if you... I don't want to mimic that by splitting. I'm listening to Daniel there, and everybody's got their own view. And I just like to say, rather than virulently disagreeing with you guys, what I was listening to, I like people who say sorry when they've made mistakes. It doesn't mean that I trust them. It doesn't mean that it's forgotten. It doesn't mean that there's not potentially mistakes or deliberate errors in the future again. It took them a long time to apologise, and it doesn't wipe the slate completely. But I think when you get part of the furore over the last few days has been accurate condemnation of the cowardice of these cheapskate half-wit owners who've misplayed their hand, miscalculated everything, haven't put themselves up for interview to back their project, and then the majority of them haven't said sorry. It doesn't write everything off, but I do appreciate it. Personally, just speaking from my own point of view, I like men and women of power who say, I did wrong, I apologise. It's a good habit to have. So in Spain, everybody is now waiting for the split between Laporta and Florentino Perez. In Spain, they are very, attentive to what goes on in Italy. Late last night, there was a very clear impression that the two clubs from Milan were on the point of leaving Agnelli on his own, being reported that Agnelli was quitting. Agnelli denied that. He's done a smashing big interview with Corriere dello Sport and Zazzaroni, the journalist, this morning, protesting, complaining. It feels like Agnelli and Florentino are going to be the last two men standing, because Joan Laporta said yesterday, of course, we were only in this if our socios, our members, vote for it. Well, why didn't you ask them first and stay out, Joan? Catalan man speak with forked tongue. The picture here is still relatively unclear because Florentino was undoubtedly behind that statement that the embryonic and now fatally wounded ESL released about, we'll still continue, we fight on. It looks pathetic, but the clock is ticking. What does Ceferin do about now the only one of the 4 Champions League clubs which remains as a rebel, and Ceferin needs to work out, does he let them play the semi-final? Does he take them out? There's going to be ferocious negotiating and back channel talking today and tomorrow. I think there's no question about that. So the momentum here this morning at 9:20 in Spain is not as ferocious as it was yesterday and last night. What a joyful day it was. And I'll tell you something. There are lessons here from the Treaty of Versailles, and it's interesting to watch Ceferin and Infantino to some degree and work out, what do they do now? Do they go and dance on the grave of the ESL? Do they go and how hard they try to punish these rebel owners? Do they stoke still more resentment and fury? To what degree are they, particularly Ceferin at UEFA, are they beholden to the briefings that they got from Byrne and Paris Saint-Germain, saying if you press hard, they'll split, and they'll split. We know, because make no mistake about it. Paris Saint-Germain, but particularly Bayern, come out of this looking very clever, very politically shrewd, and given the help that they've offered to Ceferin, their power has increased in the European top table.
The fact of the matter was that they had nobody on board for this. They managed to lose every single room possible. If they go back for another bite of this cherry, Graham, they need to include Uefa in some shape or form, do they not? Like, will their next attempt at trying to garner more revenue for their own back pocket involve the Champions League in some way?
I think that's already happened. I don't claim to move and shake amongst the top table of UEFA. That's not true. But I did speak to 4 different UEFA employees yesterday. And I can honestly tell you, no, not yesterday, starting from late Sunday night, sorry. I can honestly tell you that they were blindsided, that there was a sense of, if not panic, it was like, what's happened? Why have they done this to us? Why didn't we see it coming? Where's our leader? And what immediately was happening in the background, I think Ceferin, as far as I can interpret, has played his hand pretty well. Ferocity to begin with, but again, back channel on going out and saying, is there a hedge fund? Is there a massive fund that will allow me to match the Morgan money? And they'd announced the revamp of the Champions League, which we've got to look at with a magnifying glass, and may or may not please all of us. I certainly think that the old Champions League, or this Champions League that we're going to watch as of next week again, didn't need retouching in this style. I disagree with it, but it has been launched. But what wasn't launched was a new version of Champions League from 24-25 with an equivalent type of hedge fund backer behind it. Ceferin has been talking to one. Does he try to kill further rebel attempts by massively augmenting the competition money, the loyalty money, the prize money, by mimicking what the ESL were proposing? I think there's a fair chance that he does. And at that stage, you begin to wonder how many of the things that the ESL clubs really genuinely wanted, which is more money, have they lost out on? And one of the things I said to the UEFA people that were on the phone to me, that they phoned me, not the other way around, was they may have grown weary of having to salute UEFA whenever they come into their grounds to say, okay, it's going to look like this, you've got to do this, these are our rules, these are our rules. And it can feel a high-handedness often about UEFA employees during competitions. And if the clubs chafe at that, then I think it's understandable. But who runs things? Long before this fell apart, I was asking, could you trust the clubs to actually run a league? They don't run any leagues at the moment. They want their piece of flesh whenever they're not happy. They want more money. They carp. Often across Europe, the clubs carp their leagues because nobody likes being in harness, and everybody thinks they're bigger and clever than they are. But they need somebody, and we're going to need people. They would have been going to team. They would have been going to Uefa if this ESL had found its feet. They'd have probably been hiring independently too. But there always needs to be organisers and people that make the things happen and governing bodies. And the fact that there was a bit of chafing and they wanted more money has led to this it was the consternation of stupidity and greed after a night out with too much drinks and look at the ugly child that was given birth to far too early. And thankfully that situation is en route to being put right, but nobody should believe that the issues have all gone away.
Graham, just to speak on Florentino Perez for a second, and famously when he took over as Real Madrid president, there was this whole policy of Zidane's y Pavon's, the policy of mixing expensive signings with homegrown players like Francisco Pavon. And I'm sure you're undoubtedly one of the journalists who were writing about this at the time, but we all know what happened next, and the era of Galacticos and merchandising and worldwide stars happened. So I guess my question is this push towards profit and the notion that Florentino Perez will be president of a money-grabbing European Super League a surprise to you in any way, or is it entirely in line with the previous values he has shown?
If you're only talking about the concept, then it's no surprise to anybody, because the factors you've mentioned are spot on. But beyond that, nobody should ignore the way in which tired old white men want legacy when they've got everything else. And Florentino Perez was inspired. That Galactico idea was lifted directly from the man after whom Madrid's stadium is named, Santiago Bernabeu. It was their idea when they were a relatively weak club post-Civil War, post-World War. And Athletic Club and Atleti were the two easily dominant clubs. And Madrid rebuilt themselves, building up to the early 50s by saying we're the best players in the world, and then marketing it then to the fans, talking about it in the media all the time, and helping with L'Équipe to form the original European Cup. And they had dotted throughout their ranks the best players from all around that they'd gone and sought, and Florentino tried to replicate that with Zidane's and Pavone's. And across the piece since he took power in 2000, nipped off for a little break in 2007-8, until now, it's a moot point. You spend the rest of the show and the rest of this season's shows arguing about has he been good or bad for Real Madrid. The Madrid fans in general will say that I meet either through profession or friendship will say, we know what he's like, we know exactly what he is, but look what he's done for us. And it's fine because the trophies, the glory, 3 straight Champions Leagues, and a partial tipping over of some of the best years Barcelona have ever had. So to come back to the point, he wants to overtake, not emulate, Santiago Bernabeu's legacy as being known as one of the key founders of the European Cup. And Florentino, besides the power and listen to the way he attacked Zephyrin on television here on Sunday night, which was an absolutely pathetic own goal that helped startle English clubs away. This nonsense about, I think kids aren't watching enough football anymore, and if they haven't got the attention span, maybe we need games that are shorter than 90 minutes. You have to. Anyway, your charting of the future that Florentino Perez might still be trying for includes the fact that he wants legacy. He wants to be known as the man who ripped up the format of European football, and he wants to have his name on it, his fingerprints and DNA on it. And that instinct won't go away. In my opinion, I very much hope that part of what he's aiming to do won't happen and that this is a fatal wound. But as of this morning, it's like the Monty Python scene in it, the Holy Grail, where there's a sword fight in the forest and a limb keeps getting chopped off and he's like, flesh wound. That's kind of the mode that old Monty Florentino is in this morning.
I know Daniel Harris is still with us this morning on OTB AM. Daniel, like that interview that Graham is talking about on I think it was on El Chiringuito TV, this bizarre and frankly unchallenged interview that Florentino Perez made. One of the lines that came out of it was this notion that young people weren't interested in football and that the games were too long, and we had this idea planted in our heads that football matches in the European Super League potentially, or under Perez's vision anyway, would be shorter than the average 90-minute football matches. What did you make generally of Perez's interview and some of the comments he came out with?
So that particular one, actually, I almost felt like he had the germ of a good point in there. He didn't know that he had one. But I think that the thing with football matches, when I watch football matches as a supporter, when I watch football matches as a writer, one of the things that winds me up is that the way that time is kept is ridiculous. And if he was about to say, what we're going to do is we're going to have 30 minutes of ball in play time each way, I'd get behind that, where the clock is visible so everyone can see when it's stopped and how much time is getting added on at the end. That, to me, would be a good development for football. And ball in play time would mean that you never left a football match feeling that you've been cheated. I remember that the time that I always think about is, and it's personal, I'm a United supporter, so I think about United, is in 2004-05, United were in a group with Villarreal, Benfica and Lille. And they got knocked out of that group. And the reason they got knocked out of that group is because they were rubbish. So this isn't an excuse for why something that happened 16 years ago happened 16 years ago. They were rubbish. But I remember watching those games, coming away from them, going to the games, feeling like I'd not actually seen a game of football. So little ball in play time was there, and so little did the officials do anything about it. So if we were about to standardise how much ball in play time there is and actually increase the amount of football that we get to see and make it part of the game, I'll be behind that. But that's obviously not what Florentino Perez was saying. And the thing that him saying that revealed to me was that actually, if these guys are running their own league, they can change any of the laws of the game that they like, that they decide don't fit, and there is no one to safeguard that. And given that this league is basically them taking football away from people in order to make money, and given the thing that these guys do in their day jobs, like Roman Abramovich and Sheikh Mansour, given the way that they behave in their day jobs and the things that they're not ashamed of doing in their day jobs, then why would they not start messing with the rules of football, the laws of football, if they thought that that would make them more money? And there was no one to safeguard the game. There was no one to stop them from doing that, because they would be the people who participated in the league who were running the league. And then I started thinking they're going to have a compliance unit. What happens if it suits Florentino Perez and Joel Glazer for the result of a match to be in a particular way? And this is why you need people overseeing what happens. This is why the clubs can't run their own leagues, because it's a conflict of interest. And much as UEFA are rubbish and FIFA are rubbish and corrupt, and they've been riddled with corruption and riddled with bad decision-making and riddled with poor leadership, you need people to safeguard the game. And you need people to safeguard the game on a governmental level so that we don't have these people owning our football clubs. But you also need people to safeguard the game on a purely operational level so that the laws are the laws and so that it's fair and everyone is playing fairly.
Lads, let me in, Daniel. I hope you were speaking in inverted commas there, because you can pick off items where you say FIFA and UEFA are rubbish. But unless you've got a completely different point of view than me, and I'm speaking partially as somebody who loves football, and partially as somebody who works as a reporter of football, the Champions League is a glorious beast. It's utterly stupendous.
But that's because football is stupendous.
It's better than, no, the structure of the competition is fantastic. It's better than the European Cup. The European Cup is glorified, but the format was stale. It led to football that was unattractive. The Champions League has utterly changed. Never mind revenue and marketing. It's given us football that we'd never seen before.
I wouldn't dispute that. Although what I would say is that I think we definitely, there are some moral issues with the Champions League. Even when they started letting in clubs that weren't champions, that elevated the standard. That I'm not stupid enough to just say, well, that was a bad thing because it's the champions, they're not champions. Because when you have the European Cup, all you know that you've got the best side in all the countries from the previous season. What you don't necessarily have is the best sides at that time, because those things change. Once you start letting in 3 and 4 teams from countries, you're going to have all the best teams, because it's very rare that a team comes from 6th in the Premier League to be the best team in Europe the next season. So the standard definitely elevated. What I thought the best format of the Champions League, because they played around with it quite a bit. Like, there was time where it was just a group stage when Rangers almost got to the final when they got pipped by Marseille. That was year one. That was the kind of the first format. So I felt like the best format, and this is going to sound like a ridiculous bias, was 98-99, where I think United played 17 games to win the Champions Lee, which is a lot. Maybe it was 17 games when it became 2 groups the next season. But there was serious jeopardy in the group stages at that point. Then they did it with 2 group stages. Then they went to 2 group stages in 2000, and that was way too much. Now, where it is at the moment is there's probably, I don't think, enough jeopardy in the group stages still. I think they do need to do something to refresh that part of the Champions League before Christmas. The bit after Christmas is obviously, as you say, stupendous because you've got unbelievable football teams who are unbelievably well-funded by this cartel that they've created as a consequence of opening the Champions League up to all these clubs.
No, stop. This is my point. Initially, you said UEFA are rubbish. Now we're talking about tinkering and a product that's very good. And when people talk about not enough jeopardy, the team that won 3 times in a row recently and is in the semi-finals now was clinging on by their fingernails in the group stage this year, Real Madrid. Everybody talks about mega clubs, but Ajax got to the semi-final and should have gone through to the final the other year, having not been in one since '96. Roma got to the semi-final against Liverpool, and Liverpool by the end were knackered and clinging on to their fingertips, and Roma hadn't been to a final since '84. Last season was an odd season, and I'm not defending UEFA, I'm defending my love of the tournament and the way people, the accuracy of the vocabulary people use about it. Leipzig and Lyon, in an odd season, in an odd format, got to the semi-finals last season.
Yeah, it's a cup competition.
It might be imperfect, but I think those of us who were horrified by what we've just seen from the ESL need to choose our language really much more carefully. I don't just mean you, I mean in general. I hear some horse being talked about the Champions League because people would like to modify it, calibrate it, but use sweeping statements about it being rubbish or UEFA being idiots or that's not true.
I didn't say that, but
I said people. And you said UEFA and FIFA may be idiots and rubbish at the beginning of your diatribe. All I'd say is I knew that what you wanted was more about calibration rather than sweeping the whole thing out of the window. But all of us who broadcast, we need to be more careful because we fuel the idiots. You've seen it in Trumpism. You've seen it with Boris Johnson. We need to be much more accurate and cautious and careful about the words, the phrases that we use, because these people who have just tried to ruin football take them and reuse them. And my only point is the Champions League may need recalibration, but it is a thing of utter shimmering beauty, and it's given people like you and me, and the lads on the station, the best work of our lives.
But that's because football is a thing of shimmering beauty. It doesn't.
No, that's not enough. Football was involved in the ESL. There's no shimmering beauty there.
No, because that was pushing aside the football in order to pursue the money. And I think when we're talking about the Champions League, we need to be honest and realistic about the way that the Champions League money distorts competition in local leagues. So for example, you have repeat winners of like the English League, the Premier League, is the only league really that still generally retains a great deal of unpredictability of who's going to win it. Because what happens is you have the clubs that repeat qualify for the Champions League are then able to take their wealth into their domestic league, and it is distorting. There's not enough redistribution of Champions League money. It is distorting, and of course, when you get Bayern Munich against Paris Saint-Germain, where you have Bayern Munich and Paris Saint-Germain who constantly win their domestic league and have much more money than everybody else, you're going to have a phenomenally high level of football because they can spend obscene amounts of money on players.
Recalibrate your language. Look at Lille Paris Saint-Germain today. Look at Lille Paris Saint-Germain at the top of their league. In Spain, recently, the teams that win the league, you point to me. In Spain right now, there's a 6-point spread between fourth and first. And Sevilla are genuine candidates to win the title. Atleti are leading the title. They haven't won it since 2014. It still happens. So again, all I'm asking you is not to say the Premier League is the only one where there's a title race. I didn't say it's the only one where there's a title race. I'd say it's the least predictable of the major. It's not what you said. It's not what you said, and that's what I'm asking.
What did I say? Only back to myself.
You said that the Premier League is the only one with a competitive title race. That's what you said.
I didn't. Those weren't the words I used. There is a title race. There is a title race in Spain this season, but in general, the league is won by Atletico won one league in the last 10 years. How many leagues have not been won by Madrid or Barcelona?
Is there or isn't there also a title race in France?
This season,
yeah. Gap between Lille and Paris Saint-Germain. Then be more careful with your language.
I didn't say that there was no title race. You're hearing my words as what you would like them to have been, rather than what they were. In general, League One is not a competitive league because Paris Saint-Germain pissed the league almost every season. The one season that didn't happen, Unai Emery got fired. And the year that Monaco won the league. But of the last 10, how many haven't been won? Since Qatar's money came to Paris, how many leagues haven't they won? One.
Monaco in 16.
Yeah, the one that Monaco won.
And maybe this one.
And maybe this one, which they may still win themselves anyway.
Be more judicious in your language then.
Why? It's not generally a competitive
because there's a title race in Italy.
I didn't say there wasn't
and
one.
Spain right now. You said England was the only competitive title race.
How many in a row? Is it 7 or 8?
Daniel,
you said that only England had a competitive title race.
No, I didn't.
And you need to be more judicious with your language.
We may not get wound up in language here because we're going to end up going around in circles. One person is convinced somebody said something the other person didn't. You'll be able to go back and watch it back as well. The fact of the matter here is that there is going to be a lot of these conversations that happen over the next little while, like whether or not the Champions League is the perfect format and whether or not that change will happen over the next couple of years. To inflate the entire thing is something that's going to be of, as we can hear, of huge contention over the next little while. I know it's been a lot of your time this morning and I really appreciate it, Graham and Daniel. And I know you both want the same thing for football at the very end of the day. Daniel Harris, Graham Hunter, thanks for
you guys.
That's a virtual hug.
Yeah, there is.
Thanks very much to the lads. It is 8:40 a.m. on this Wednesday morning. Really interesting discussion there, and both bringing a really interesting perspective to things, because I've heard that criticism level of the Champions League many times over the past little while about the fact that the group stages just don't matter, and then once you get to the knockout stages it becomes this brilliant thing. Then when you think about the alterations that are being brought to the table from the Champions League, it's not exactly addressing that problem that some people think exists. And maybe the answer to this is that the Champions League is actually an already perfect format, and maybe the ESL became this intriguing thing that people might have wanted to see because they thought that it would be an answer to maybe the group stages not being great in the Champions League. Because what was the ESL? It was one giant league where you would get Real Madrid against Liverpool every week, or games of that quality every week, whereas you wouldn't get that necessarily in the group stages of the Champions League. So I think there's a very interesting point raised there. Did this actually come from the discussion around the Champions League and trying to make the best competition in world sport, one of the best competitions in world sport, even better? So yeah, it's a fascinating one. We're going to revisit that, I'm sure, over the next little while, because it's a conversation that is absolutely going nowhere. As I said, it is 8:41 and OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning, start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. We're going to take a quick break, and up next we're going to be hearing from Suzy Wrack of The Guardian to discuss the Super League and the impact on women's football.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
The Women's Six Nations is here, and OTB Sports is your one-stop shop for all the best coverage, analysis and opinion.
As Ireland take on Wales and France to decide their position on finals day, we will bring you a special weekly Six Nations show with some of the great names of the game, as well as special interviews with Irish legends Sophie Spence and Rosie Foley.
With reporters at the games, all the latest team news, match previews and much, much more. Check out otbsports.com/Women's Six Nations.
Sean, what's that thing going round the garden?
That is our new Husqvarna Automower.
Automower?
Yeah, it's a robotic lawnmower from Husqvarna. Cuts the grass automatically, has GPS tracking and an app. Even works in the rain. I just thought, why spend time cutting grass when I could spend it with the family?
Great! You can put the dinner on, so...
No can do, love. Have to paint the man cave.
Husqvarna Automower. Never mow again. Learn more at husqvarna.ie.
Check out the Boyle Sports app today for details on which football match is getting the no-lose treatment this week. Plus, browse through dozens of new player markets, all powered by Opta. Shots on target, left foot, right foot, headed goals, assists and more. See the Boyle Sports app for full T's and C's. Boyle Sports. This is betting. Gamble responsibly. See gamblingcare.ie 18+.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, put your best face forward with our new and improved razors.
You're welcome back. 8:43 on this Wednesday morning. You're welcome back to OTB AM. We're turning our attention now to the impact of the Super League on women's football, and I'm delighted to welcome Suzy Wrack of The Guardian to the programme. Good morning to you, Suzy.
Good morning. How you doing?
Good, thanks. I was making the point earlier on that this might have been a bullet dodged by the women's game. Am I fair in saying that?
Oh, 100%. I mean, it's hard to know how serious they were about including the women's game in the proposals in the first place, in that obviously it was reduced to one sentence. After the men's is established, we will quickly set up a women's competition, I'm assuming in a similar format, but we weren't even told that. It's hard to know whether that was serious, but regardless of whether it was or not, it would have undoubtedly impacted clubs, even if there was no mention of women's football, because obviously all of these teams have women's teams. Chelsea are in the semi-finals of the Women's Champions League, playing on Sunday. City and Chelsea have got a big title decider tonight in the Women's Super League, and it would put incredible pressure on UEFA and the FA to make a decision about whether they should be allowed to compete in those tournaments, because how could it possibly be conceivable that the animosity and the this political financial battle going on at the top of the men's game, how could that possibly not filter over into the women's game if you've got, say, City going up against Everton in the league? It's just not feasible. You can't have those clubs working in one corner of the game and not in another. There would be big repercussions across women's football as a result, because obviously you've got some of the biggest teams in England and in Europe involved, but then also you've got the exclusion of some of the biggest teams in Europe potentially if there was to be a women's format set up, with Lyon and Wolfsburg not involved on the men's side. They're the two most successful teams in Europe on the women's side, and you've potentially not got them involved in the competition. So there were so many different ramifications, and yet it was reduced to that one sentence in that initial launch, when like I say, regardless of whether they were included or not, they should have been a part of the conversation as to what would happen for governing bodies and UEFA generally with women's football as a result of the Super League on the men's side.
Yeah, they said as soon as practicable after the start of the men's competition, a corresponding women's league will also be launched, helping to advance and develop the women's game. This is right up there with the thought given to maybe the football pyramid and to helping those at grassroots level along over the next couple of years, because it didn't seem that there was any more detail to that, and you'd question whether the people who actually fronted this have had much of an influence in the growth of the women's game anyway over the past couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, the major players in the whole project of the European Super League, Real Madrid, Manchester United, Juventus, AC Milan, they've all had very, very fledgling women's teams. Man United is 3 years old, Juventus is 4 years old, that's the oldest. Real Madrid is 1 season old. AC Milan have only just launched a team. They're all really new to the women's game. So, I mean, obviously you've got some of the more established teams in there, the Arsenals, Chelsea, Man City, Barcelona slightly longer than those four I mentioned at the start. But, you've not got the key to European football. You've not got Lyon, you've not got Wolfsburg, 7-time winners Lyon of the Champions League, twice winners of the Champions League, Wolfsburg, and finalists last year as well, playing Lyon in the final. And so, yeah, I mean, it's inconceivable that these owners and executives of Manchester United, Real Madrid, and Juventus in particular, that only turn their attentions to women's football within the last 4 years at best, have the best interest of the women's game at heart. I mean, they were, in the case of Man United and Real Madrid in particular, pretty much dragged kicking and screaming into support for the women's game. There was real pressure on them, momentum from fans generally, but also, the pressure from the women's game generally in terms of coming from the FA itself, from FIFA, from UEFA, from the local confederations of some of the European teams, was really, really strong. The FA were pushing very hard on Man United to get them to embrace the idea of a women's team, not just to get them to come on board, but to really embrace the concept of it and the potential for it. And they've come on board with what we know is their interest, with money in mind. They've come on board because it's starting to show signs of profitability, not because they have any great love of the women's game, because they've shown that. So the idea that these should be in charge of the future and that we should be grateful somehow for their inclusion of women's football in their proposals for this multi-billion pound European Super League project is crazy.
Suzy, I noticed you writing in recent days about, women's football now should be about independence and sustainability from, financial and governance point of views. So, with women's teams in this European Super League being dragged along before the collapse, along with the men's teams, do you see a future where, in any way, maybe financially or otherwise, the women's teams almost split from the men's club or the parent club, so to speak, and forge their own path? Or how do you see that panning out in the coming years?
I don't think they'll split completely, in that I think that you'll still get these connections, these ties, the women's game, Arsenal women feeding off the reputation of Arsenal more generally. And I think that's important. There's a rich history there and a relationship between the club, between the two teams, and the club and the women's team. And, I think there are benefits to having this kind of similar branding, for want of a better term, between the sides. But I think financial stability and independence will be important, that the women's football teams and clubs stand on their own 2 feet independently of the men's side. So, they're not getting as big handouts from the men's clubs as a whole as they do now, that they're bringing in enough to warrant the investment that they're getting. And that is happening, with the new broadcast rights deal, with the Barclays sponsorship of the Women's Super League, which expires at the end of next season and will need to be renewed, or there needs to be a new title sponsor. Assuming that deal is going to be a bigger one, as the previous one was the first. So money is starting to come into the game. So I think we'll see that more. But I think there's got to be a real look at how women's football is run, who's in charge of it, how clubs are run, and how women's football teams are, and that aspect of clubs is managed, because there's not any of the kind of checks or the supporters group. There are supporters groups in women's football, but they're new. They're quite cheerleady at the moment, because they don't need to really do more. And I think we need to have a bit of a rethink about how much we trust the people involved in women's football, because obviously until very recently, anyone who was involved in women's football was involved in it because they believed in it. They had to be, otherwise you just wouldn't bother. It's not worth it. You would lose money from any corner of the game, as a club, as a journalist, as whatever it may be, as a fan. You wouldn't make money from women's football. But now, with interest increasing and clubs sort of pressured into joining the party, whether they really, really believed in it or not, because the momentum was there and the money was starting to be visible, means that we sort of need to be a lot more careful with who we trust. We've got to think, now we've got people involved in this sport with ulterior motives, with their own interests at heart, with the interests of their clubs more directly at heart, rather than just general growth and progress of the game. And I think we have to be very, very careful about who we trust with guardianship of women's teams and women's leagues. I also thought it was really interesting that the FA have done so much in the whole ESL debate, and really put their cards on the table and said, we're not standing for this, and we're going to stop player registrations from abroad and all that kind of stuff, and have really put a block on the any startup for the ESL on the men's side. But yet the FA sort of has, within however many years, has almost been very, very hesitant to challenge the Premier League, or the big Premier League clubs in particular. There's almost be this fear of upsetting them, that we need them more than they need us, and we don't really actually have that much power over what they do, and we sort of have to ask for crumbs from the table. And we've seen that in women's football, in that there's countries, leagues, women's leagues in the world where the men's the federations, I think in Latin America, Brazil possibly, where in order to get into the men's cup competition, the clubs have to have a women's team. That's a requirement. So there's things that federations can do to push the women's game forward. But the FA has always stepped away from any kind of like hardline approach. It's always been we'll win them to it, we'll win them over, we'll win the support for this little initiative or that bit of money or whatever it may be. And I would like to see the FA generally, not just in women's football terms, like, in terms of, racism and all that kind of stuff too, where harder lines need to be taken, that they do that they wield this sort of this power a little bit more. They have been a part of preventing this from happening, and they are a not-for-profit organisation that is supposed to be there for the benefit of football. I would like to see them step in a little bit more on the women's side and the men's side, and hold the Premier League and Premier League clubs to account a little bit more in the same way that obviously fans and stuff should too.
I agree, and I'm totally fascinated to see how this whole European Super League nonsense is going to improve football in different ways. And I noticed in your article on Monday, you're even writing about how Liverpool improved their training grounds and had even a beach volleyball court, but no room for the women's team involved. And the journalist Shireen Ahmed, I saw you were retweeting him last night. He was saying European men's football is falling apart like a terrible stadium that they make their women's teams practice and play in. Now, I know we've come along a little bit, and Manchester United's women's team played in Old Trafford, I think, recently for the first time. But we still have this sad and continuing reality in women's football that, in some sectors of women's football, that the women's teams just aren't treated at the same level as the men's. Is that one improvement, that even in something as basic as facilities, that maybe something positive can come from all of this?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot that can be taken from it, in that, there's huge money in football, as is evident by the greed of these richest clubs. They like, despite their pleas of poverty, they are not poor. They are still, whilst complaining about the pandemic and their losses on the one hand in case of Real Madrid, eyeing up their next big Galacticos in the next sentence. It's the hypocrisy is revolting, and that needs to be exposed more, because obviously, as you say, there's huge hypocrisy on the women's side. Liverpool are the prime example. They had their women's player, the temporary manager of the women's team, buying bunk beds for their accommodation and things like that, because the club weren't supporting the housing issues that the team had a couple of years ago. And as a result, as of kind of mismanagement, lack of funding, lack of support, Liverpool were relegated last season. Have they bounced back this season? No, they haven't. You thought maybe it would be the kick up the butt they needed to suddenly start taking the team seriously, especially with the introduction of Manchester United onto the scene, and the sort of seriousness with which they are taking the women's team at the very, very bottom, at least. And also, the rise of Everton too. You thought maybe this might be a moment, this relegation might click something in the minds of the owners and the leadership structures of Liverpool that says, hang on, we've got to take this seriously. But then next minute, you've got the nice shiny training ground launched, and no space for the women's team, no mention of the women's team, who still play at Tranmere, who have had games cancelled because their pitches have been waterlogged and frozen and just basically muddy bogs. Tranmere's been really, really torn up over Christmas. And then you've got, Arsenal manager Joe Montemurro has said he's leaving at the end of the season, and whilst he's very, very adamant that it's unrelated, there is a lot of talk that there are much deeper troubles at Arsenal, that the investment and the support for the team isn't as strong as it could be, that as a result of the pandemic, the women's team are training at the Hale End Academy site instead of at London Colney, and there's frustrations about that as well. These aren't I suppose the treatment of their women's teams is an indication of just how serious they are about football for fans, in a way, because if they cared about football playing a broader role in society and communities, and kind of being representative and born from the communities and workplaces that they were born from, then they would care about the women's side and they would look after it. It's women are 50% of the world's population. They're an important part of communities. They would have a more maternalistic approach to those teams, but they don't. And that shows that reflects the the real ambitions of these clubs, which is profit, money, and whatever's going to get us there, we'll support. And that's what's starting to change. They're starting to see, wait a minute, there's money to be made in this game. The big sponsors are starting to come in. The broadcasters are starting to come in. So maybe we'll suddenly start upping our investment. And at the moment, it's very cheap to do very, very well in women's football very, very quickly, as Man United have shown. They've only been in 3 years. They've gone from the Championship, won it in the first season in the WSL, they finish fourth, I think, and now they've this season, really kind of fought at the top end of the table, and probably will miss out on Champions League football, but become very, very close to getting it within 3 years. So it doesn't take a lot of money to be successful. That will change, but at the moment they're starting to see, oh wait a minute, there's something to be made here. We can make some money here, and that's why we're getting interested. It's not care for the game, it's not love for the game. And I think that reflects their ambitions more broadly. Yeah, and if you're looking at it in a cynical way, you'd like to think now that those clubs that were involved in the Breakaway League will have to try and wrestle back some sort of respect with the local communities, and maybe a bit of added investment in the women's game wouldn't do them any harm on that front, but I guess the WSL might actually benefit from that, so nobody will be complaining. So it's going to be a very interesting few months. Suzy, thanks very much for taking the call this morning. Really appreciate your time. No problem. Thanks for having me. It's nice to chat about it. Cheers. That's Suzy Wrack there of The Guardian, and you can check out her work on The Guardian. So coming up over the next half an hour, we're going to be turning our attention to the League of Ireland and what they've made of the last few days, the grotesque capitalism that has reared its head and tried to wrestle football away from what a lot of people know and love. Already this morning, we've had some interesting content. We had Daniel Harris and Graham Hunter go head-to-head. It's up on YouTube now. It'll be up on our podcast streams very shortly if you want to go back and check that out. Coming up as well before 10 o'clock, we're going to have all the reaction to the Super League dismantling itself, really, certainly from the English standpoint, from the football show last night. That'll be coming up at 9:30. OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. As I mentioned, Stuart Byrne and Daniel Lambert join us next on OTB AM to talk about the Super League collapse and how domestic football in Ireland can take advantage of it all.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station. Off the ball.
And he also said to ask him about the Hummer golf buggy I saw him driving in Portugal.
Yeah, well, the Hummer golf buggy, it wasn't mine, it was a friend of mine's, and I rented his place, and that was his buggy to get about, so yeah, it was interesting. I was trying to keep my head down at times, but it should be. It was a little bit, yeah. Not sure what Roy Keane would have made of it.
Off the ball. Weeknights from 7 and weekends from 1.
This is OTB Sports Radio, live 24/7 on the OTB Sports app.
Check out the Boyle Sports app today for details on which football match is getting the no-lose treatment this week. Plus, browse through dozens of new player markets, all powered by Opta. Shots on target, left foot, right foot, headed goals, assists and more. See the Boyle Sports app for full T's and C's. Boyle Sports. This is betting. Gamble responsibly. See gamblingcare.ie 18+.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, put your best face forward with our new and improved razors.
You're welcome back. It is 9:03 on this Wednesday morning. You're with us here on OTB AM. Let's bring you some of the sports pages. And we will start with otbsports.com. Watch Liverpool owner John Henry apologising for his Super League plans. He has released a statement this morning. He released a video statement this morning, and he has fronted up and said sorry. Meanwhile, Liverpool legends call on owners to find a buyer and move on. Graham Souness, Jamie Carragher amongst those voices. John Henry dodges reporters' questions entering Fenway. That was the earlier story on John Henry. And Manchester United, Arsenal, Liverpool and Spurs withdraw from Super League. Meanwhile, Ed Woodward resigns. Live by the sword, die by the sword. That is the headline there on the Manchester United situation. The Irish Times this morning leads with this story, as you can imagine. Woodward to quit Manchester United amid breakaway fallout, and Super League unravels as all English clubs quit. The Irish Examiner then, checkmate for Super League as clubs cave into pressure is the main headline there. And back on the pitch, lacklustre Chelsea stumble back into top 4. A GEA story that naturally went under the radar last night is the retirement of Peter Crowley. Veteran defender Crowley steps away from Kingdom's setup. Would have been part of the All-Ireland winning team in 2014. The Daily Telegraph, Super League in ruins as Chelsea and City quit on night of high drama. Photograph there of jubilant Chelsea fans after that news was announced. The Sun, sick as a parrot, is the headline. Super League is no more. It ceased to be. It's stiff. It's now an ex-Super League. Fan power, Prem, FA and UK government unite to knock out sickening breakaway plot. The Irish Daily Star is EU turn. League of Greed left in ruins as Big Six pull out and United chief Woodward quits. The Mirror, European Super League. It's a major surrender as United chief Ed Woodward quits, and Chelsea and Man City lead a mass pullout of hated League of Greed. The Irish Daily Mail is, they think it's all over. It is now. Super League crumbles as all 6 Premier League clubs quit after just 48 hours. The London Times, they football fought back with a Chelsea fan holding a Super Greed banner. The Guardian then, Super League chaos, Chelsea and City pull plug on breakaway. The Herald goes with the headline, Super bad, breakaway league chaos as City and Chelsea pull out and Woodward resigns. And then the Irish Independent, Super League left in ruins. Woodward to quit United role as Chelsea and City lead exit from Dirty Dozen. There's also Peter O'Mahony talking about the return of Simon Zebo on the back of the Irish Independent as well, saying he is what Munster need to win again. So we're going to be joined by a couple of brilliant League of Ireland voices in just a moment to chat through their take on what's actually going to happen over the next little while. And the last week, I guess, Daniel Lambert, who is COO of Bowes, and Stuart Byrne are going to be with us very shortly indeed to go through that. Shane, there's been a big reaction, as you can imagine, on YouTube this morning to our comments. We've got Paul McGee saying, as Gareth Roberts would say, get in. Football unity has shown these Perez disciples that football outweighs cash. Still disgusted at FSG. Time for FSG to sell my beloved LFC and get the hell out. They have ruined the 10 years in charge of Liverpool that looked so promising. Liam Deegan said, Chelsea Football Club just saved football. And Easel says, Shane is just relieved that Monaghan haven't done anything overnight like sign up to a GAA Super League.
Well, I'm just glad of that as well. Who knows? Who knows what can happen in the future? This whole European Super League, if it has taught us anything, it's that, excuse me, if it's taught us anything, it's that anything is possible in a few days. Someone could tell you one thing on the phone one day, and then the next day they're turning around like a snake and going the other direction. It's just, the whole thing, and the back pages kind of summarise it, Owen, just the bizarreness of the situation, that if someone opened those newspapers or got a forward cell glimpse of those newspapers a couple of months ago, they'd be thinking, what the hell is all this about? Even after the match last night, the Brighton-Chelsea game at Stamford Bridge, like Adam Lallana is being filled in the post-match interview about the latest situation. Basically, what's happened since I started playing this evening, and he's informed that clubs have pulled out, that Ed Woodward's left United, and you could see it all registering in his face, and he's just like, okay, well, now I have to try and respond to all of this, and like, he made the point, this is a great night for football. Like Chelsea, it's the beauty of the Premier League. Chelsea in a Champions League semi-final upcoming, pushing for the top 4 again. Brighton fighting for their lives at the other end, and the financial disparity and gap between the two clubs is absolutely huge. And yet last night, Brighton come away from Stamford Bridge with a deserved point and should have come away with much more. Thomas Tuchel as well, speaking after the match about, he said he was informed like all the rest of us were. He said it wasn't tough, but a bit strange that, these are strange times, and that he's not being asked questions about his team selection in the interview before the match. He's being asked about anything but. So it's just bizarre. And then you have the statements after the match coming in, and we mentioned the Daniel Levy statement, the PR spin beginning. It's like Logan Roy in Succession. Like, these guys they have too much money to know what they want to do with it, and they wanted more money. They got greedy. And I was just reading while you were going through the headlines there, John Henry's message to supporters, and just the transcript of the video we heard earlier on. At least he had the cojones to use the personal pronoun I. He says I a few times. I want to apologise to all the fans for the disruption I caused in the past 48 hours. That has to be commended. He's not pawning this off. He's not doing an Ed Woodward and slipping into the night without so much as a mention of the Super League or the disastrous situation this was. And Ed Woodward, by the way, was one of the key players in this. We all know that. Not that John Henry wasn't, but he has taken responsibility, and he has said, we've heard you. over the last 48 hours, you were very clear that it would not stand. We heard you. I heard you. The only problem there, John Henry, is you heard people far too late. Why weren't fans involved in this process from the outset? Before this European Super League even became a glint in any of their eyes, the fans had to be part of this discussion and heavily part of the planning for it if it ever got to that stage. So the comments from different people in the last 24 hours will be debated and discussed for who knows how long. But I just thought that was interesting, that at least John Henry used the personal pronoun I and took responsibility. But really, the be-all and end-all is that fans should have been consulted long before it got to this stage, Owen.
Have you tried to watch much of the football over the past couple of nights while this has been happening?
I tried to watch it. To be honest with you, last night, and this is a problem as well. I threw on Chelsea Brighton last night before the match. I basically went off about my business and threw on the snooker during the match, and threw on Chelsea Brighton again after the match to hear the lads, Jamie Carragher and Gary Neville on the line, and you had Graham Souness and Glenn Johnson in studio discussing the current situation. This is the problem. It's taking away from the football. Brighton had a great result last night. Leeds drew with Liverpool the other day. There are other huge worldwide European super clubs like Real Madrid dropping points as well in La Liga. This is being forgotten as this all goes on around us, that these so-called super clubs are losing matches, and we're not even watching these football matches. We're getting distracted. Of course we're getting distracted. This is a bigger story. But the point is, and someone else made the point, Owen, that these so-called big six, we've always referred to these big six in the Premier League, but we're going to have to come up with a different name for them now, because the cowardice and greed that has been shown by those clubs, one of which I support, has been disgraceful, to say the least. So we need to stop referring to these guys as the big six, and I think we will from this point forward. People have started to realise that it's just some of these super clubs on the New York Stock Exchange. We need to stop putting them all on a pedestal, and I think this whole situation will change the way we view these clubs.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that's going to be quite a theme of this next conversation. Delighted to welcome Daniel Lambert, Chief Operating Officer of Bowes, and Stuart Byrne, League of Ireland legend, to the show. Good morning, lads.
Morning.
Morning, Eoin.
Daniel, you might start with yourself. I guess in a weird way, the last few days have proven that the soul of football actually kind of matters at the end of the day.
Yeah, that absolutely does. I think, it's funny that it's taken this, for me as a League of Ireland fan, I look towards the game globally, and particularly in the UK. I kind of seen this for decades now. And it's kind of taken this, I suppose, for people to realise it. And just look at the list of owners in the Premier League. Like, these are people who for the most part, are corrupt. They're morally bankrupt. And I don't think they can ever fathom or understand. It's not within their kind of viewpoint to understand the emotion, the value, the connections that people have with football clubs. They view them purely in the prism of finance and big business, and that's now being totally exposed, and it can't be refuted.
Do you think this point was coming anyway, regardless of whether or not a Super League was the thing that pushed them over the end? Because it's been said so many times over the last few days, Daniel, that this is nothing new, the greed that has existed, especially in British football over the last little while.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, these people and these owners, and they view these solely as businesses. Like, make no mistake about that. And they see these as businesses. They're involved. Normally, the people who own these clubs are involved in things like, the wholesale theft of resources from countries, or the, extractive industries that are destroying the planet. And what they see is extracting maximum profit and shareholder value. That's their only aim here. They just view these as items on balance sheets, and it goes against the very essence of sport. The places that these clubs have come from, working class communities, giving people a sense of community and identity, are so far from the minds of these people. And this is a natural extension of where the game has been going for decades. And personally, I'm really delighted with it, because it just shows it for what it is. And I think that it'll be really interesting now. What I fear is that this should be the kind of tipping point that forces people to analyse what football is about and bring it to a better place. But I fear now that the status quo that we had last week is going to be accepted as some kind of utopia, rather than use this opportunity as a moment to push back against where the game has been going.
Can I ask, when you looked at this through the prism of your own role with Bohemians, and I guess as somebody deeply involved with the League of Ireland, like, to put it bluntly, did you see kind of like a sense of slight opportunity here, even at the end of the day when these conversations are happening? Do you think that this could have some sort of knock-on impact positively for Irish people and their relationship with their local League of Ireland clubs?
I'd hope so. I wouldn't view it as like, it is an opportunity, of course, because if people question their allegiance, say to Manchester United or to Liverpool, these clubs have bigger fan bases in this country than League of Ireland clubs. We know that. So that it presents an opportunity in that sense. What I'd worry about though is I think personally that we look at the league here in the 60s and 70s, we've lost several generations of people to the live game in Ireland, to the live football experience and what that experience means, what it brings. And people, and the majority of football fans in the country have maybe began to consume football rather than to be a part of football. And they're two very different things. To consume football through a TV or to consume football from a distance as some kind of soap opera is an entirely different experience, and to me a lesser experience than going to a game locally and engaging with, you know, the people in your area, with, you know, intergenerationally, people from different backgrounds and classes being together and experiencing sport. They're two very different things. And I think the game of football has lost that element, and that's not something that's easy to bring back. And I hope it does happen, but time will tell.
Stewie, a lot of the discourse of the last couple of days has been, you know, around Liverpool's Shankly roots and the homage to the working class communities, and, you know, the same for United and Newton Heath and all that. But like, we've even spoken to you on this programme when you released your song Superstar about Wes Hoolahan and the importance of street football. Do you think what has happened over the last 48 hours will remind people that football is a game that comes from working class communities, that maybe that's been forgotten with these the big clubs and the big bucks and the owners that only care for themselves? But do you think this whole situation will have reminded people of football's true roots?
I do, yeah. I think that's exactly the result of it. I think the last year in particular has reminded people of their roots. I mean, people have gotten very nostalgic over, obviously because of the pandemic, and people have been locked up, and they've really started to think about, you know, different things, their whole lifestyle, their culture, what matters to them. And from my point of view, I know I've definitely sort of started to look back over the history of the game here and realised, you know, that, you know, it wasn't all that bad at times. When you think back to, I know Liverpool fans are thinking back to the Bill Shankly times, and Dan alluded to the 60s and 70s in Ireland here. There was a huge, connection with the community, with the game here. You know, there used to be huge crowds going to Dalymount Park and other stadiums around the country because there was a connection there, wasn't there? We didn't have, we didn't have live television. We didn't have, TV probably didn't come into the late 60s or maybe even the early 70s. So we weren't exposed to, football in England or whatever the case may be. So people felt connected to the football club here. And then, of course, that all changed. And what's happened as a result of that is that it has gradually become this monster. It's out of control. It's completely out of control, and it's in the hands of people. And Dan again articulated it extremely well. I couldn't disagree with anything he said. I think he really nailed it. Football is now in the hands of people who just want money and power. And you only have to look at Real Madrid. They've been bailed out by the city of Madrid twice in the last 20-25 years, to the tune of hundreds of millions of euro. And so, therefore, off the back of this, I'm delighted that this has kind of come out, and I'm delighted with the reaction. But I'm very much the same. I reacted kind of quite differently to this. I've switched off to the Premier League stuff probably 15 years ago, to be quite honest with you. I just seen it. I lost interest. I was playing at Shelbourne at the time, and I was very, very much a part of what I felt was something that was changing here. It didn't transpire in the end, but it gave me a sense of belonging. And I think that's hugely more important than anything else. So that's what I think what needs to come out of this. I think there's an opportunity now that we re-engage soccer fans in this country with the game here, and try to maybe offer them that connection that maybe they've been missing for a long period of time.
Dan, for someone who is feeling a bit like Stewie at the moment, and maybe someone who has followed English football or has been a Liverpool or Manchester United fan or Arsenal fan from Ireland in recent years, but maybe feels a little bit disillusioned with the whole thing at the moment, And I don't know how many people are going to be put off Premier League football in Ireland, or Premier League, Irish people who are put off the Premier League. We don't know how many people are going to be affected that way. But hypothetically, looking at the situation of their club and seeing the greed at the top of club ownership in England, but maybe for someone who doesn't have a League of Ireland allegiance at the moment, or maybe a team in their locality, whether it be their town or county, what do you say to those people who maybe need a little bit of convincing that the League of Ireland is where it's at for them?
First of all, I'd say come to Dalymount, but they do well to get a ticket to Dalymount the last couple of years, to be honest. Thankfully, our games have been sold out. But no, look, Stewie absolutely got to the heart of it there. You know, you need to look at, like, what is football about? It does provide people, like Stewie said, the words belonging and connection. And that is what it's about, you know. And I think that as a society, you know, in Ireland, if we just think back for a second, that it seems like this is divergent from football, but it's at the core of it. People have extremely transient living situations because of the cost of property. So they rent and they have to move consistently, and that leads to isolation from their family groups. So they grow up in an area they can't afford to live in. Less people are involved in the church, obviously, right, for obvious reasons. But that was a cornerstone of Irish, you know, kind of sense of place and sense of connection for a long time. That's past. Jobs, people have very transient work situations. You know, they don't have vocations anymore. And then you look at things like, you know, like unions and things become less relevant. So a lot of the touch points in people's lives have gone. This sense of who you are, what you're about, you know, something that's consistent in your life. A lot of things that were taken for granted are now removed. And they've mainly happened because of big business and greed. You look at something like the work situation or the housing situation, that's born out of greed. And to then take something like football, that's more of an emotional experience and an irrational thing. Like, why do you attach yourself to a football club for your whole life? You know, it's a strange thing. It's more of a spiritual and a kind of an experiential thing. And for that to be taken then by big business isn't acceptable, because it destroys the essence of football. Football isn't a business. It's a game and it's a sport. And business can have a role to play, but it can't consume it. And I think that's what's happened. And by going to a League of Ireland game, I think you get a purer sense of the game. And that shouldn't sound like romanticism or, you know, I'll come to a rickety stadium. No, we do need to improve facilities, and there has been great improvements made. But what's funny for me is, like, we played at Chelsea last year. This has happened in all League of Ireland grounds. I'm sure Stewie has examples, but it was Frank Lampard's first game as manager, and there's a lot of Chelsea fans in the stadium. The older, kind of hardcore Chelsea fan in his 50s or 60s loved Dalymount. Absolutely loved it, and was saying, this is like I'm close to the pitch, you know, I don't have to sit in my seat. There's people with flags, I can get a pint of beer, right? Loved it. The younger fans, they've grown accustomed to something that's portrayed on television, that's built on debt, like Stewie mentioned, that isn't sustainable, and that is kind of a sideshow. And that's what they now have come to expect. So I just tell people, like, have a dose of, like, what football should be about, what it provides, and League of Ireland can provide a brilliant experience, and that's what the game should be about.
That's a really interesting point, because I think that transience was almost something that the Super League, maybe in an oblique way, actually wanted to embrace. This trend of younger people supporting players as much as teams and having loyalty to the person that they've unpacked in FIFA Ultimate Team. That is something that Florentino Perez wanted to embrace, but it isn't something that's sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. And this idea, and I can see in the term legacy fans, like, they talk about we're willing to discard legacy fans and move to the fans of the future. Like, this isn't a tech company, you know? And I just, again, once you get into these kind of areas of speak, what it seems like is consultants and people involved in global business have put their mechanisms of control that can work in loads of industries where they can make a vast amount of money. But you're putting these kind of business terms on top of something that has its base and its value lies in emotional connection. People's emotional connection to football, whether it's a player, a fan, a member, a community, that's about emotional connection. It's often irrational. And you can't rationalize that just down to the highest dollar or the highest euro. And that's what they've attempted to do here, and it's backlash. There's been a backlash against it.
The game's being run by agents and big business. You know, there's extortionate amounts of money being traded on players here. You know, 50, 60, 70 million. Agents are getting half of that. It's disgusting what's happening, you know. And I'd be a little bit more you know, this whole deal, there may be a lot more malice behind this than just having this, you know, utopian Super League where everything is wonderful and great. It's a little bit like Wall-E, you know, the scene in Wall-E where everybody just are on the ship and everything's handed to them and screens and it's perfect. Like, you know, I think there's a lot more malice involved here. You know, you're talking about big business getting involved with banks. They're effectively trying to ring fence their future, secure their own future against against economic downturns or whatever. And I don't think it's a coincidence that this happened a year after COVID came in. These football clubs are probably looking at their bank balances and going, "Hey, we could be in trouble if this keeps going, guys. Let's get a few banks in here and let's see if we can try and secure ourselves and so on." So it's people. Education is huge here. And Dan, you're very well read on the past and what's the history behind all this. And I think it's important that people understand that as well. There's a history here. This hasn't just happened in the 10 years or since 1992 when the Premier League came in. There's a history that goes right back. I'm talking about the Irish connection here. Goes right back to the post World War II, the 50s, the 60s. Huge unemployment in Ireland. People were leaving the country in their droves in the 50s, and they got this connection that they weren't getting here. They got it with England and so on and so forth. We won't get into that now, but history is a huge part of it all, and educating people on why League of Ireland is in the state it's in at the moment. There are reasons. It's not just because the game is crap here. The game is fantastic. We have wonderful, fantastic players. You only just have to look at the quality that's on the pitch and the quality of goals that we see week in, week out. It's just as an overall product, it's perceived in the wrong way because people don't understand.
The point you make there about COVID as well is at the base of all of this. It's no coincidence whatsoever that this is happening in the middle of a pandemic. It's a reaction to an emergency situation. And I wonder, Daniel, is there a challenge that you have faced that's similar to this sort of philosophical dilemma between commerciality and sticking true to your roots, which I'm sure is at the heart of every football club at the moment? You've got your survival instincts, but also being true to what Bows are as a football club. Could you talk us through any of those dilemmas that you've had to face?
Yeah, I think, look, for us, and it's funny because the last 12, 18 months has been, it's been so challenging for so many people. And for us, the Dalymount Park's hosted games since 1901, and for the first time in Dalymount's history, there's been games with no crowds. And that puts it into context when you look at a stadium that's hosted games for 120 years. But what was funny about the last 12 months, and I seen Sligo's figures released too, for member-owned clubs, it seemed that we were able to move through this period, still with difficulty, but in an easier fashion than privately owned clubs, because we saw our membership increase during COVID to its highest level ever. And people paying a premium to be a member of a club where the main kind of gain that they get is admission to games, and they knew that wouldn't be possible. But we saw a really, a great loyalty from our fan base, an increase of members, a significant increase during COVID, and people spending on merchandise and really helping us move through the period. So that was really reassuring. Also, look, it was well publicised that the Matt Doherty windfall that arrived, at a perfect time, last summer. But ultimately, when you say the question between clubs and their commercial partners as a members-owned club is one that sits there. And I think there are certain areas like, there's certain industries that have a big profile in the game, that aren't particularly positive to the game. It's obvious what that one is. And I think clubs have to make decisions on those. And there is always a line there, because ultimately commercial income can help you to grow your club. But what I'd say is more important, private-owned clubs have investment, and they've got private investment, and they can turn that tap on or off. But a member-owned club and a community club like Bohemians, or say someone like Sligo Rovers, you operate in an ecosystem and an environment where your investors are ordinary people, and a large group of ordinary people. And the more you can kind of behave in a positive fashion, where they have a sense of pride or a sense of respect for what you do, then they're more likely to get involved with you as a club. They're more likely to buy a shirt if they're far away, or come to a game if they're close by. And ultimately, it's having those kind of a positive outlook and act in a positive fashion that will make the club stronger, and that improves the football on the pitch and allows you to navigate a period like now a lot easier. So I think it's not as simple as accept all money that comes your way commercially, because if that goes against the values of the club, and ultimately what we're talking about here and what's happened over the last week is about core values. If they're destroyed, then the football club ends up with no real position. It's just a business then. And again, football clubs are so much more than that.
Dan, can I just ask, and Bo's social media channels have posted out this video that I know did the rounds a year or two ago, whenever it was, directed by Jamie Goldrick, I think. The great video of the kid in his Manchester United jersey up in his bedroom, and his dad calling him down and watching a match on TV. And I think that the slant you were going with was terrace is not TV, and getting fans out and kids out especially to these matches. Have you sensed something around the League of Ireland in recent years that there is more of a desire for people in the localities to get out and watch matches regularly. And how do you think the events of the last 48 hours will impact that?
Yeah, I think they'll make it more likely. Ultimately, the concept for that video came from the fact that we began to see people come to Dalymount who ultimately were Premier League fans, but they'd seen their kids just kind of be consumed by technology. Kids who are watching iPads and watching TVs, and this was an opportunity for them. And the video kind of gets to the idea that you'd spend time with your kids, you know, and experience football as a family unit together in the real world rather than on a sofa. And that was the kind of aim of it. And we have seen a lot of that. And I do think that I think again, back to the values question, like if everything in your life is consumed by big business and then the sport you want to get involved in is also consumed, I think people are aware of that. And they're maybe saying, right, this isn't the positive thing. And I do think it will hopefully bring people to games here. Like, and Stewie has said there, like, quality of football is brilliant. Like we were at the wrong side of a 3-1 defeat last night to Sligo. Have a look at the goals from the game. You know, 4 fantastic goals, a brilliant game of football. You know, it could have been 2-2. It ended up being a 3-1 defeat for ourselves, but a brilliant game of football. And I think that what's happened here, I hope will make people question, you know, what these clubs are about, because it's been going on for a long time. And if we resort to the status quo, as I said, as we were last week, where it's just, okay, we're happy with the revamped Champions League and the Premier League, and people then forget this, I think that's an opportunity lost.
Without question. Stuart, Byrne, last one to you then. This obviously comes at the back of 9 months or so without fans in grounds. There is this distant relationship that people will have with the Premier League anyway that's only become more distant over the past year. Will that drive people towards their nearest football ground here? Are you encouraged for the future as a result of the way British football has acted over the last little while?
I am encouraged. I've been encouraged for a while, and not just off the back of what's happened in the last couple of days, but even through, you know, just from talking to people in my own job before COVID, I felt there was, you know, these bar stools, football fans that were starting to kind of maybe question why they even watch some of the Premier League stuff, and they were trying to re-engage back with Irish soccer. So hopefully this might be a big part of getting soccer supporters here to start looking a little bit more locally. Hope we will definitely get crowds back in at some stage this season. I'm sure of that. And it's you know, I think we need to realize we need people on board. You know, this is going to be a very, very difficult thing to grow and try and change mentality here, but we need people to engage with it and to send a message out, and just to bit by bit just try and improve year on year. And hopefully this will be the straw that broke the camel's back, maybe.
Yeah, I've already got messages in my own WhatsApp group of people saying that they want to buy Bows season tickets. So bad news for you, Stewie. Good news for you, Daniel. Lads, thanks a million for taking your time this morning. Really appreciate it.
Cheers, thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers. That's Daniel Lambert, Chief Operating Officer of Bows, and of course, legend of the League of Ireland himself, Stewie Byrne. Right, there is a massive reaction to all of the conversations we've had this morning, particularly one conversation we had this morning. Cian Fahey says, get Hunter and Harris on the crappy quiz. I'd be up for that. I think it's a great shout. Would the lads be up for it? The question is, who do you put in the middle of them? Who is the third contestant in that triangle? Captain Burkham says, so glad this was stopped in its tracks. It was beautiful to watch the football community come together and fight side by side. Michael says, well, maybe people could come together and actually fight back against something that really matters. Football is great, but what was attempted here has already happened to every other aspect of society. It's a really good point, and I think Daniel Lambert of Bows, as you just heard there, would agree wholeheartedly with that point. Dahi says this was a brilliant fisticuffs between Hunter and Harris. John says LeBron invested a lot of money into Liverpool a few weeks ago. He knew about the Super League before Klopp or Hendo. LOL, he says. Leeds fans on YouTube says all the clubs involved should have a transfer ban for 2 windows and their Premier League purse forfeited for this season. While the Big Gooner says they should make the group stages like the Euro or World Cup group stages single leg fixtures. You play everyone in the group once. More jeopardy, less football. I think less football is not what the Chiefs in Uefa want at this moment in time. Kent says Perez knows that Real can't compete with Manchester City or Paris Saint-Germain in the long run, so this was a chance to bridge that gap. Somehow, definitely think there's truth in that. And then Dave said, I'm doing my best to get into the Drogs this year. Paid for Watch LOI and we'll go to the games once the stadium opens. The big problem is the quality of the football though. Peter says, get Monaghan Town back in the League of Ireland, Shane, and forget the English team bud. he says. So I'm not sure if that is your bud, Peter, Shane, but he's saying to burn that Manchester United jersey right now.
Well, listen, this is the thing, and that's what I kind of meant about localities. Like Monaghan United was my local League of Ireland team, of course, until they went bust when they got promoted to the Premier Division. But there's something that is just special about going out to matches on a Friday night in your hometown, having a couple of beers with your mates, and that's something we can't experience at the moment. Now, you could go up the road to Dundalk or to Drogheda and watch games there, but I think a lot of people will start to do that more and more over the coming years because of what's happened over the last couple of days. And just on like Daniel Harris and Graham Hunter were obviously heated in their discussion, but there's a good point to that. We're on the same team here, and so are they. Like, we all want the best for football, and discussions like that which Daniel and Graham had can only be a good thing, because we now need to sit down once we forget about the European Super League and decide what is the best way for football to go forward, not just from an administration point of view, but what's the best structures for the Champions League, for Europe. So I think these are all healthy conversations. They're on the same. It's like Jurgen Klopp and Gary Neville. You know, Klopp kind of attacking Gary Neville for using "You'll Never Walk Alone," when in fact they were both on the exact same team, and it was just a bit of a bizarre take from Jurgen Klopp. But to be fair, these managers like Klopp, like Tuchel, like Solskjaer, have been thrown under the bus by their managers. So they're a bit hot-headed in their post-match interviews of late. So you have to give them a bit of leeway from that perspective. But we have to remember, most of us here are on the same team. You might support United, you might support Liverpool, you might support Bows, but we're all on the same team here. We want football to be as good as it can possibly be, and for the fans to be at the centre of it all. So I think that's the main positive that will come out of all of this, Owen. I think many people will agree, no doubt.
Gerard has been in touch to say a lot of people would support Irish clubs if that was what everyone else did. A lot of it is down to what we talk about in the pubs. If everyone was talking about the Irish Cup final, no one is, he says, going to say, hey lads, what about Chelsea yesterday, instead of the Irish Cup final, is what he's saying there. I do think that there is more of a social aspect building up around it though, and Friday night games do help, and I do think that there will be an uptick after COVID does away with itself. I'm just trying to find the right language there. Maybe when we're all vaccinated, who knows what the future of crowds is going to be, but I do think that there's a positive outcome that comes as a result of the last couple of days. It comes as a result of the distance that we've all had to endure between ourselves and our football clubs. Right, so let's tell you what's coming up on OTB Sports Radio today. At 1 o'clock is OTB Gold, an Irish football special featuring Given, Quinn and McAteer in conversation with Kilban. Kilkenny's Mount Rushmore is up at 3 o'clock. Then at 4 o'clock is a retro panel on the GAA and mental blocks with Val Andrews, Shane McGrath and John Devine. And from 6 o'clock then is OTB Gold with Colm de Gooch Cooper. From 7 o'clock then, Off the Ball is live on your radio and on the OTB Sports app. Simon Cooper is going to be in the company of Joe. You're going to have Noel Healy, and the football show continues with fallout from the Super League collapse. You've been watching OTB AM Sports Breakfast Show from Off the Ball. We are live in association with Gillette. Good morning start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. Tomorrow morning we're going to bring you more on the Super League. Louise Galvin joins us to talk to Six Nations, and there is much more besides. Just to leave you on a couple of comments before we leave you go, Shane. I think Shane's glasses look good, but Shane, these have just landed in. I don't know what that's about. Oh, sorry. That's a comment from Tommy saying he thinks Shane looks good. Adam Fahy says, why is that guy wearing safety glasses? And Conor Linehan says, OTB at 9, welding at 10.
I needed safety glasses for Daniel and Graham Hunter. I knew sparks would fly, so I needed them on this morning. But they're actually blue light glasses, and they help me sleep.
All right.
But I'm willing to take all feedback, all abuse. People can tell me at ShaneHannon01 on Twitter how terrible they look. Feel free to give me abuse all morning, because clearly this is the most important thing to happen this morning. But I appreciate any comments that also tell me I look good. Thank you, Tommy, the producer, for at least standing up for me. This is like when your mother tells you that everything is okay and that you'll get a girlfriend someday. Doesn't mean as much when it comes from your producer, but I appreciate the sentiment.
Yeah, they look great. We're all on board. It is 9:38 this morning on OTB AM. It's time to hear a bit of last night's football show.
Very happy to say Andy Mitten, editor of United We Stand, has made time for us. Hi, Andy.
How are you doing?
You were on with the lads this morning. Didn't anticipate having you back.
No, I didn't anticipate what would happen today. I think this morning there was some talk, quickly dismissed, that there was some disharmony among the breakaway clubs. And then it wasn't really until later on in the day that the talk started to heat up that it could be Chelsea or Manchester City. I was encouraged when Pep Guardiola spoke out against the idea of the preposterous Super League, and also when Marcus Rashford tweeted, and I just sense a growing feeling that this isn't going to go away, that the people who organised it wanted it to blow over, that they knew there'd be a bit of blowback, but it was gathering momentum. And when Boris Johnson, who I didn't know had any interest whatsoever in football, said that we need to change legislation and implement legislation now, with a group of Manchester United fans who we met this morning, albeit over Zoom, I thought that the mood is so strong, the groundswell is so strong that it's becoming difficult to ignore. And then when 1,000 Chelsea fans turned up on Fulham Broadway outside Stamford Bridge, I was encouraged by that. I was encouraged by the unity among supporters across all clubs. I spoke to people from Liverpool today, and our feelings were very, very similar. Nobody wanted this Super League. The timing was terrible. It was ill-conceived, and any good that might have been in it was just completely lost with the perceived arrogance that the club had for their own fans by not communicating anything, by the news dropping. Admittedly, it was leaked an hour before Manchester United's game against Burnley. The manager left to hang out to dry and talk about a subject that he knew nothing about, because he'd only been told 20 minutes before kick-off. And I'm pleased this evening that it's all falling apart. It's an iceberg carving itself up, and it's great to see, because the greed should never have happened. And sometimes greed does succeed in football. Often it does, but not in this case.
The Glazers and Manchester United very much billed as one of the leading lights in this whole venture. There's no sense that they were wavering especially or freaked out by the frenzied reaction?
I've not been told of any sense of that. And if anything, they've got experience in frenzied reaction, because they rode out the sustained storm in 2005 when they took over Manchester United. And they in 2010, when there were the green and gold protests, they appeared to pay scant regard to that as well. But clearly it is ruffling feathers. Ed Woodward is going to depart after 7 years as United's leading suit. I mean, he wears a suit, but he doesn't wear the trousers. Joel Glazer wears the trousers, and he's the man on a day-to-day overseeing things from Florida or from Washington, D.C. And both have become deeply unpopular with Manchester United fans. I remember interviewing Ed Woodward a couple of years ago, and I do exactly the same with the guy who follows him, and I ask tough questions, and there was fury. Why on earth are you even speaking to him?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, what do you want me to do? Just interview people who you like.
Man United have made the point that he was set to leave at the end of the year anyway. They've just brought this forward, but there's no great issue here. I mean, it does look like the Glazers have said, well, Ed, you did a lot of the legwork on this, so it's fallen apart at the seams. It's an embarrassment. Away you go. Is that your read?
Yeah, he's lived on the sword and he's died on the sword, because that's how I read it. I mean, that it comes out tonight within minutes of other clubs pulling out of what is looking like a failing project. It's not coincidental, is it?
I wouldn't think so. And maybe the Glazers, if they care about public relations, I'm not sure they do, but if they did, I mean, I'm sure they could wangle this a certain way and said, well, Ed told us this was the right way to go, and that we just went along with what he said was good advice and the right thing to do for the club, etc., etc. He hoodwinked us as much as everyone. I mean, nobody will buy it, but they might say, well, look, it's an easy sacrificial lamb. And as you said, no Manchester United fans are weeping over Woodward's departure, so they may go that route, the Glazers.
They might do, and there are a lot of good people at Manchester United who've done really well during the lockdown, and they were horrified at these proposals, as were employees of other football clubs, but they couldn't come out and say it publicly because they'd lose their jobs. And players were concerned as well, and communication has actually improved a lot between Manchester United and the fans, and you see things like the section in the Stretford End where the fans have got autonomy. Ticket prices have been much better than in the 5 years when the Glazers took over. Refunds given for European away trips, which didn't happen, free trips to Astana in Kazakhstan. All of this sort of stuff would have been unheard of when I started United We Stand 30 years ago. So there's definitely been some progress, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend for 1 minute that the Glazers are loved at all. The issue of their takeover is it still invokes anger, as it did 16 years ago in May 2005 when they took over. And they can point and say commercially we've been very successful, and that they have done, but that highly leveraged takeover should never have been allowed to have happened. And I'm not convinced by that ownership model, nor by the ownership model of several other clubs. And I think if anything can come from this, it can be a look at the governance within football. I was quite surprised when Boris Johnson came out this morning and talked about bringing legislation through. Maybe he was being populist, but
come on.
I mean, I wouldn't expect it of this government, which is renowned for its cronyism, for a start.
Boris
but it would certainly be popular.
Listen, vote winner. Let's nail down those Labour seats and keep them for good, you know what I mean? So, look, you raised a very interesting point there. And it comes down to the ownership at all of these clubs. Now, it is a different situation at Liverpool, where Henry, I was about to say is popular, but certainly was popular. But Henry to the rescue, took the club away from horrible Hicks and Gillette and brings in Klopp, and look where they are now. And so it's a betrayal. This is a betrayal of the Liverpool fans. That's their relationship with their owner. Manchester United fans, I would put it to you, this is a confirmation of everything they've ever known about the Glazers. This is a confirmation of everything they've ever suspected about the Glazers. Now, the green and gold protest was serious, and you will remember it. You were in the stadiums. It was a rocky enough time. They weathered it out, and I think most United fans, look, Ferguson said they were okay and got the training ground and success continued, and look, they are taking lots of money, but they've generated lots of money. Let's just, not make our lives a misery here and get on with things. And it had kind of died down, is I think where we were. I'm sure, in your conversations with your mates, you were all still saying, don't like it, but we are where we are. What's been very interesting this past 48 hours is this now has reopened the Glazer situation. It has re-energised fans, I would suspect. And you take Gary Neville last night. I mean, he decimated them. He called them scavengers. He said they need booting out of the club, booting out of the country. Talked about how he felt complicit in not speaking up. Talked about the lack of paint at Old Trafford. I'm not sure he can go back to talking about their back four next week. United, of all the ownership situations now, this is the tinderbox.
I spoke to Gary several times yesterday before he went on television, and I've written more than anybody about the state of Old Trafford. Yeah. And I mean the physical state of Old Trafford, to the point that people have said, why are you writing this? We need a new centre forward. And I'm saying, no, it's really important that the development of this stadium continues. I'm not saying that now in COVID times. I'm on about pre-COVID times. You used the word there, confirmation of what the Glazers are about. It absolutely is in the eyes of many. And yes, commercially, they've been extremely astute. And yes, wins and trophies do sate fans. Fans are extremely loyal, but they're also fickle. And after the takeover in 2005, I saw people who sang, not for sale, I'm going to give up my season ticket. They didn't. They went back. The stadium was full for every single game. Mm. And I think the owners who buy into these clubs know that fans are addicted.
Yeah.
And 4,000 fans did go and form FC United, and they're still going now, and they've got a great ground in North Manchester. And the political schism which it caused, on a sort of grassroots level, it's still felt now. I mean, I lost a lot of my writers to United We Stand. Friendships ended in 2005.
Did you think about going with them?
My brother was the first player to join FC United, and he dropped down 5 divisions to play for them. And some of my best friends formed FC United. And when they were forming, the people forming it didn't know that much about non-league football. Now, all my family have played semi-professional football, so I was getting some of the phone calls. My brother actually put the first manager in. I can remember where I was when we took that call, and when he said, this is the man, you should get to do it. And that man, Carl Marginson, was manager for 11 years. Some of my best friends went to FC and are still part of FC, and I wish them well. And I gave them a page in United We Stand. I carried on going to Manchester United, carried on going to all the home and away games. I saw extremes on both sides, and this civil war developed where, even though I tried to be fair and give them a page in United We Stand, on one hand I had people saying to me, it should be 4 pages, and on the other I said, why are you even acknowledging their existence?
Right.
And it took years to die down, and you saw these arguments being played out largely online, but also in real life, and everybody thought that they were right, and there was very little give. There was a lot of entrenched positions, and it was heartbreaking. And the Glazers caused that.
Yeah.
You know, people who were best friends didn't speak to each other after that day in May 2005. And I went to FC. I went a lot when my brother played. I went there with my dad. My dad really enjoyed it, and I've been pretty much every season since, but nowhere near as much as I've gone to Manchester United. But let's be honest about myself, it's also my job, Manchester United.
Sure.
You know, this morning somebody said to me, if this Super League does go through, would you continue to report on it? And I probably would. It's my job.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I'm a football writer. And if I turn around to my wife and say, you know, I'm not going to go to Madrid next week to cover Real Madrid against Chelsea, why?
Well, exactly. Do you think Neville and others are of a mind now to really try and lead this charge against the Glazers, make it uncomfortable for them, or will this dissolve away over the next couple of days into weeks?
It's a good question, because fan protest tends to dissolve away, and that's my worry with these things. There's always new events happening. There's always games to take people's minds off things. I think Gary's definitely emboldened. He's been pushing behind the scenes for football to have an independent regulator, and putting his money where his mouth is as well. You know, he doesn't always get a good press, Gary, even from Manchester United fans, but I know loads of things he's done behind the scenes, where he's put his own money into things to help out fan causes. And on Sunday night, I found myself defending him in a WhatsApp group. You know, this is how these communications go on now, where friends of mine were saying, I'm not buying into him. He's interested in Salford City. Where was he in 2005? And I said this to him yesterday. And it was quite funny watching him say it on television last night.
Yeah,
but I'm also glad that he did say that, and that he was contrite and felt he'd been partly complicit, because no players came out in 2005. I think he's had major, well, I don't think I know because I speak to him, he's had major concerns about the ownership at Manchester United for a long time. For a time, I wondered whether him and some of the lads he'd played with were going to get more involved.
Well, I still think the class of '92.
Paul Scholes was helping out.
The class of '92. Sorry, there's a delay on the line there, which is make this messy now. I definitely have a sense the class of '92 have that, or some of them, long term, to get hold of that club.
Yeah, what they don't have is the finances to do so, because looking at the stock market valuation, and I've spoke to people who've got way more power even than Gary Neville, serious people even today, and they say that the Glazers would want, $4 billion. It's a lot of money. It's a huge amount of money when you consider how little they paid for it in that highly leveraged buyout. Yeah. And what they do, it remains a cash cow for them. They can still take dividends. They're considerable to the man in the street, but they're actually quite small by corporate standards, and that's one reason why they wanted to push for this Super League, because they feel that they own this global asset which doesn't actually make that much money. Yeah. And I'm glad that it's not going to happen, and I hope that they reconsider their role at Manchester United and realise that that they're not popular. They'll probably never be popular. But I don't know what the plan B is. People last year were talking about an owner from Saudi. I'm not convinced by that model, by an oligarch or by state interference. For a long time, I thought that the Barca model was the best model, but I've seen that extremely closely, and I have my doubts about that, because unfortunately it involves human beings and egos and the shifting plates of politics, and at times it's been far, far worse than at Manchester United. At least the Manchester United model has been relatively stable.
Andy, listen, thanks so much for coming on. I'm sure it's a very busy evening for you. Much appreciated.
Nice to talk to you.
Cheers. Andy Mitten there, editor of United We Stand. Just very happy to say we will finish our evening with Philippe Auclair. Hello, Philippe.
Good evening to you.
It is a good evening, isn't it, Philippe?
Hey, it's all right.
You said yesterday you didn't see this getting off the ground. I mean, you couldn't have seen it crumbling this quickly at the same time. Extraordinary.
I thought 48 hours for the cracks to open, but how quickly it fell apart, this has surprised me a little bit. But I think the more we learned about the way that this thing had been put together and the sheer incompetence of some of what had been done, I think we started to think, well, it could fall apart quite quickly. And also, there were indications that some of the clubs had been quite reluctant to follow the lead of Real Madrid, Manchester United and Liverpool. What happens to those three is going to be very, very interesting indeed. And we now have confirmation of that with Manchester City obviously dropping out, which is something I think we guessed when we heard Pep Guardiola in his press conference. I think many of us thought, not sure he would say these things if he didn't have the okay from high up. And Chelsea, who were never really totally committed to the cause and were more or less in the project because they didn't want to miss out, have fallen out. Now, the question is, of course, where does that leave us? Because if we think it's a great victory for football, we should remember that yesterday was a great defeat for football because of the adoption of the new format of the Champions League, which is still going to benefit exactly the same people that we've been saying horrible things about. They are going to be the ones who profit the most from it. So we should be happy that we've avoided the worst thing. But we should also remember that in the meantime, a reform that many of us would have opposed very, very strongly just went past the post without almost anybody batting an eyelid because there was something else to be worried about.
It's true. There is something galling about UEFA emerging victorious this evening, having passed this awful new version of the Champions League. I'm not looking forward to watching the initial stages of that, I can tell you. As you allude to, there were some passive passengers in this journey, and then there were the leading protagonists, Agnelli, Perez, Manchester United, Liverpool. You said it'll be interesting to see how they're treated. Expand on that. What do you think different treatments will be dished out to different members of the Dirty Dozen?
It's very interesting to think. I think in a way that the prodigal sons and daughters will be welcomed back within the so-called family. When you see the statement from Ceferin about Manchester City this evening, I have to say I find it saccharine and very difficult to digest, because it's almost as if, oh, you're such wonderful people to realize you've made a mistake, when guys, you're not wonderful people at all. You really try to, I'm trying to think of a polite word, but I can't think of one, but so you have to think of one for me. It will be, the fallback will be fascinating to watch, because it won't be the same for every single club. I think for a club like Chelsea, for example, it will be almost negligible. Because they were always a little bit remote from the whole process. They're moving out of it quite quickly. The relationship between the ownership and the fan base is quite different from other clubs. When it comes to Liverpool FC, I think it will be extraordinarily damaging for the club because of the way that J.W. Henry and FSG have commercialized the brand, the uniqueness of what is supposed to be Liverpool Football Club. And the fans won't forget that. They've got very, very long memories in Liverpool. Real Madrid is the most fascinating one, because Florentino Perez should really been thrown out of the game, full stop.
Why?
Yes, he should be thrown out of the game. He should have been thrown out a long time ago. This man is, what can I say? We haven't got lawyers on this program, so I will stop here. But
okay.
I think that the way that this man has behaved is just dreadful, just absolutely dreadful. And he should be made a pariah. He won't be. He won't be. And how they're going to get out of this situation, Because at the moment, what we're seeing is that the cracks have opened in the mirror, which means that once the cracks happen in the mirror, the whole mirror is going to fall off. It hasn't quite happened yet. So we're waiting for Florentino Perez and the others to tell us that they are genuinely out of this and that they should. I mean, you remember there was this tradition in the Middle Ages when somebody confessed to a crime, that they had to put on a white shirt, carry a burning candle in their bare hands, sometimes with a rope tied around their wrists, and walk around the cathedral and around the city, expiating their sins. I would love to see that, but it's not going to happen, is it?
It's unlikely. Do you suspect this weakens this cohort and their trust in each other, and the fear that UEFA have that actually this group will ever follow through in the future? Do you think this puts a bit of a nail in any Super League hopes over the next number of years, or do you think they'll come back again?
I think there will be other projects, because it's never enough. What we're seeing today is the logical, it's a logical process which was starting in 2007, when UEFA had a choice between making it very clear that they were going to deal with the Champions League and as they saw fit, and that the power would lie with the federations and the member associations rather than with the clubs. And they decided, under Michel Platini and Gianni Infantino's guidance, to deal with the clubs. And we've seen what's happened since then is that they've given up a fingernail, then it was the little finger, then it was the hand, and now they try to eat the whole body. But it is a consequence of what UEFA has been doing with the clubs for 14 years. So it's not going to stop there. And also what is not going to change is the fact that those 12 clubs and so many others around Europe are on the brink of bankruptcy. I think that the accumulated losses of the 12, the dirty dozen, over the 2019-20 season is around 1.2 billion euros. And that's 2019-2020. 2020-21 is going to be even worse for many of them. So we're talking about people who were really desperate for some money, not purely, but also because of their bad management, and also because of the fact that they were not, financed properly, or didn't go about their business as a club should do, as a responsible club should do. But it was a means for them to get out of this situation. Now, the carpet has been whipped, or will be whipped, from under their feet. And the new system, the new Champions League system, is only coming in 24-25.
Yeah.
So therefore, there is a period which is going to be very difficult for these clubs to live through, and you might see some pretty dramatic things happen. I mean, what's going to happen to Inter? What's going to happen to Milan? Have you seen the numbers? I mean, it's just ridiculous.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, put your best face forward.